Nathan Cole, you will marry Eleanor Whitmore before this Sunday ends, or I will have your deed signed over to me by Monday morning. Edwin Harrington's voice carried across the churchyard, loud enough for every soul in Willow Creek to hear. Nathan's jaw went tight. His hands curled into fists at his sides. 30 feet away, a woman in a faded blue dress stood perfectly still, watching him with eyes that showed no fear. Only a quiet, devastating recognition that they were both trapped inside someone else's plan. If this story moves something in you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Nathan Cole had not slept in 3 days. Not since the letter arrived from Harrington's office delivered by a boy too young to understand what he was carrying. Not since Nathan had read the words twice, 3 times, standing in the kitchen of the house his father built, trying to find a different meaning in the sentences, and coming up empty every single time. Not since he had folded the letter into quarters and stood at the window watching the cattle move across the dry summer grass, thinking about his daughter asleep upstairs, and what her face would look like if she woke up one morning and this ranch was gone. He told himself it wasn't real. He told himself a man like Harrington couldn't actually do what the letter described. But Nathan Cole had lived in Willow Creek long enough to know that Edwin Harrington had done things just as bad before, and the men who tried to stop him were either gone or broken. So on a Sunday morning in July of 1884, Nathan put on the only suit jacket he owned, the one he had last worn to bury his wife, and he drove his wagon into town. The churchyard was already crowded when he arrived. He hadn't expected that. He had hoped privately, foolishly, that Harrington would have the decency to keep this quiet, to make it a small practical arrangement with as few witnesses as possible. But Harrington had never done anything quietly in his life, and Nathan should have known better. Half of Willow Creek was standing in that churchyard like they'd been invited to a show, dressed in their Sunday clothes, talking in low voices that went silent the moment Nathan's wagon rolled up. He climbed down without looking at anyone. "Nathan?" His neighbor Carl Briggs stepped forward and touched his arm. Carl was 60 years old and had known Nathan's father before Nathan was born. His face was creased with something between apology and helplessness. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, he does," said a voice behind Carl. Harrington's man, a lean attorney named Pierce with ink-stained fingers and cold eyes, was standing near the church steps holding a leather document case. He didn't even bother looking up from straightening his cuffs when he said it. Nathan looked at Pierce for a long moment. Then he looked at Carl. "How long have people been here?" Carl rubbed the back of his neck. "Harrington sent word yesterday evening. Said there'd be a wedding and everyone was welcome. He invited the whole town." "Near enough?" Nathan breathed in through his nose. He had been angry before in his life. Angry when the rains stopped coming. Angry when the bank refused his extension. Angry the night his wife died and left him sitting in a dark kitchen with a 7-year-old who didn't understand why her mother wasn't coming home. He knew anger well enough to recognize its different shades. What he felt standing in that churchyard was a particular shade he had only found once before, the kind that burns cold and steady like a coal that's been lit too long to flare. He walked up the church steps without speaking to anyone else. The inside of the church was cool and smelled of candle wax and old wood. Pastor Hale was standing at the front, and the look on the man's face told Nathan everything he needed to know about how willingly the pastor had agreed to perform this ceremony. There were people inside too, filling the pews. People. Nathan recognized the Delacroix family from the South Road, the Morrison widow, the men who worked at the feed store, children Nathan had watched grow up, all of them watching him walk down the aisle with expressions that ranged from pity to open curiosity. Nathan stopped at the front and turned around to face the door. He waited. And then Eleanor Whitmore walked in. He had seen her before, of course. Willow Creek was not a large town, and Eleanor had lived here for 2 years. He had seen her at the general store, seen her at the post office, passed her on the road once when he was driving cattle. He knew what people said about her the way a person knows weather they haven't personally experienced through other people's descriptions, through the particular tone that settled over conversations. Whenever her name came up, she was the old maid, the woman no man wanted. 30 years old and unmarried, which meant in the accounting of Willow Creek in 1884 that something was fundamentally wrong with her. Too educated, people said. Too opinionated. Came from money back east, but clearly something had gone sideways there because she was living in a 2-room rental above the dry goods store and taking in mending work, which was not something a woman from a good family did unless the family wasn't good anymore. Nathan had never paid much attention to any of it because he had his own problems, and Eleanor Whitmore had never been one of them. But now she was walking down the aisle of the Willow Creek church in a plain blue dress that had been washed so many times it had faded to the color of early morning sky, and Nathan Cole looked at her and felt the first unexpected thing he had felt since this nightmare began. She wasn't desperate. He had expected desperate. A woman who had been pushed to the margins of every social gathering, who had been talked about and dismissed and pitied for 2 straight years. He had expected to see that defeat written on her face. He had expected her to be grateful or nervous or trying too hard to make this palatable. Instead, Eleanor Whitmore walked down that aisle with her back straight and her chin level, and she looked at the assembled townspeople of Willow Creek, the way a person looks at a landscape they're passing through, acknowledging it but not belonging to it. When her eyes found Nathan's, there was no apology in them and no appeal. There was only a steady recognition clear as creek water that said, "I know exactly what this is." "Do you?" She stopped beside him. The silence in the church was the particular silence of a room full of people who are collectively holding their breath. Pastor Hale opened his Bible with hands that weren't quite steady. It was Harrington himself who broke the silence first. He was sitting in the front pew, which no one had asked him to do, in the way that powerful men occupy spaces they were never invited into. He was a big man, Edwin Harrington, broad through the shoulders, silver-haired with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and had since hardened into something that looked like authority, if you didn't look too closely. "Well," Harrington said loudly enough for the whole church to hear, and with the satisfied tone of a man watching a gamble pay out, "I'd say this is the best either of you is going to do." The laughter from some section of the pews was not quite loud, but not quite quiet either. Eleanor did not look at Harrington. She did not flinch. She looked at Pastor Hale and said calmly and clearly, "Whenever you're ready." Nathan found himself looking at her profile, the set of her jaw, the absolute steadiness of her. Something shifted slightly in the cold burn of his anger. He couldn't have named it at the time. Pastor Hale began. The vows were spoken in under 4 minutes. Nathan said what he was supposed to say, each word coming out flat and serviceable as lumber stripped of everything except bare meaning. "I take. I will. I do." He heard Eleanor's voice beside him doing the same, not mechanical exactly, but precise. Like someone reading a legal document aloud, making sure every word was accounted for. When Pastor Hale pronounced them husband and wife, the silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before it was replaced by the particular sound of a crowd that can't decide whether to applaud or murmur. They did both. Harrington stood up from the front pew and straightened his jacket. "Congratulations to the happy couple." His voice had that private amusement running underneath it that Nathan had come to recognize as the sound of a man who believed he had already won. "I believe that satisfies the terms of our arrangement, Cole. Mr. Pierce has the documentation." Nathan turned to face him for the first time since entering the church. "I want it on record," Nathan said, "that this was coerced." Harrington smiled. "A man always has choices, Nathan. You chose your ranch over your pride. I'd say that's a reasonable trade." "I want it on record," Nathan said again, louder this time, so that the people in the pews could hear it clearly, "that this marriage was demanded under threat of illegal foreclosure. I will be looking into the legality of that debt, Harrington. Every figure, every date." The smile stayed on Harrington's face, but something moved behind his eyes. "You're welcome to look," he said. "Lot of men have looked. Haven't found much worth worrying about." "Then you won't mind me looking." Harrington's attorney, Pierce, appeared at his elbow with the document case. Harrington broke eye contact with Nathan and turned toward the door, waving one hand in a dismissive gesture that managed to encompass Nathan, Eleanor, and the entire event. Enjoy your afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Cole. He walked out of the church, and about a third of the crowd filed out behind him, which told Nathan something about the shape of loyalty in Willow Creek that he filed away carefully for later. The remaining people crowded forward in that uncomfortable way of townsfolk at an event that hasn't resolved into anything comfortable, offering half-formed congratulations. Watching Eleanor with open curiosity. Watching Nathan with sympathy they weren't quite sure he'd want. Eleanor was speaking quietly to Pastor Hale. Nathan couldn't hear what she was saying, but he saw the pastor nod twice with the expression of a man receiving information he considered important. Carl Briggs appeared at Nathan's shoulder. "What are you going to do?" "Drive home," Nathan said. "What else would I do?" "You're really taking her back to the ranch." "She's my wife," Nathan said, and the words felt strange in his mouth, like a phrase in a language he didn't speak. Where else would she go? Eleanor had one trunk. Nathan had half expected more, had expected without quite acknowledging the expectation, the kind of woman who arrived with demands already formed, who had opinions about which room would be hers, and whether the curtains needed changing. He had built up in the 3 days since Harrington's letter a comprehensive image of the trouble this woman was going to bring into his house, and he had organized his resistance to that trouble in advance. One trunk. Loaded into the wagon bed by the man from the dry goods store, who came down the stairs carrying it apologetically, like he was sorry it wasn't heavier. Eleanor climbed up onto the wagon seat without assistance or comment, and sat with her hands folded in her lap, while Nathan climbed up on the other side. They drove out of Willow Creek without speaking, the wagon wheels turning through the summer dust, the sound of the town fading behind them. About a mile out on the road, Eleanor said, "I want you to know something." "All right." "I didn't ask for this. I want that clear between us from the beginning." "I didn't ask for it either," Nathan said. "I know." She was looking straight ahead at the road. "But there's a difference in how it affects each of us, and I want you to understand that I understand that. This is your home we're going to. Your life. Your daughter. I am walking into things that belong to you, and I have no illusion that it will be easy, or that you will welcome it." Nathan said nothing. "What I'm asking," she continued, "is that you let me be useful. I won't ask for more than that right now. Just don't make me invisible in my own household." He turned to look at her then. She was still looking at the road. "What does useful mean to you?" he asked. "It means I can help with your books if you'll let me look at them. It means I can work. I'm not fragile, Mr. Cole. I'm not a charity case, and I'm not a decoration." She paused. "And I'm good with children if Lily will let me near her. I don't expect her to, but I won't give up on her either." "Her name was Rose," Nathan said. "My wife. She died 18 months ago." A beat of silence. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm not looking for a replacement. I'm not offering to be one." They drove the rest of the way in quiet, but it was a different quality of quiet than the silence in the church had been. That silence had been the silence of two strangers forced together by someone else's will. This one had the tentative, fragile quality of two people who have said difficult, true things to each other and are waiting to see what grows in the space those words opened. Lily was on the porch when the wagon pulled up. She was 7 years old, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and she had been told by the woman who watched her on Sundays that her father was bringing someone home today. She had not been told more than that. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed over her chest and her chin pushed out, and she watched Eleanor climb down from the wagon with the flat, unblinking assessment of a child who has decided in advance that she will not be managed. Eleanor stepped onto the porch and stopped in front of Lily without crouching down or using the particular bright voice that adults often deployed at children, as if volume and false cheer could substitute for genuine attention. She looked at Lily straight on at whatever height that put her, and she said, "You must be Lily. I'm Eleanor. I know this is strange." Lily stared at her. "Are you going to tell me to call you Mama?" Eleanor blinked once. "No." "Good," Lily said, "because I'm not going to." "That seems fair," Eleanor said. "I haven't earned it." Lily uncrossed her arms very slightly, then seemed to catch herself and crossed them again. "Why are you here?" "Because some people in this town made a decision without asking your father or me if we wanted it." Eleanor glanced at Nathan, who was carrying her trunk up the porch steps. "But I'm here now, and I plan to make myself useful. Can you think of anything around here that needs doing?" Lily studied her with the exhausting thoroughness of children who have not yet learned to be politely and curious. "The garden's a mess," she finally said. "Papa doesn't have time for it." "I can garden," Eleanor said. "Will you show me where it is?" It was not warmth yet, not anything close. But Lily unfolded her arms and led Eleanor around the side of the house, and Nathan stood on the porch steps with his wife's trunk in his hands and watched them go. He stood there for a long moment after they'd turned the corner. The bunkhouse held 4 ranch hands: Moses, who had been with the Cole family for 11 years, and whose loyalty ran bone deep; Decker, 22, and still proving himself; Holt, a quiet man from Texas, who did twice the work he was paid for; and Walsh, who drank too much on Saturdays but was dependable the rest of the week. They had all heard about the wedding by the time Nathan came to find them that afternoon, because news in Willow Creek moved faster than weather. Moses waited until the other 3 had found somewhere else to be, and then looked at Nathan without pretending otherwise. "How bad is it?" "She seems—" Nathan stopped. Found he didn't have the right word. "She's not what I expected." Moses, who had the earned wisdom of a man who had watched Nathan Cole for over a decade, said carefully, "Good or bad? I don't know yet." Nathan turned and looked toward the house. "She's in the garden with Lily right now." Moses raised both eyebrows. "I know," Nathan said. "You want us to—" "Treat her with respect," Nathan said. "Same as anyone else working this ranch. I don't want her made uncomfortable, and I don't want special treatment going either direction. She's here, and we'll all manage it." Moses nodded slowly. "And you—" "I'll manage it too," Nathan said. The first week was a study in careful distances. Eleanor woke before sunrise every morning. Nathan, who was also an early riser, found her on the second day in the kitchen with the ledger books open on the table, a cup of coffee going cold beside her, a pencil working its way down columns of figures with the focused efficiency of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. She looked up when he came in, and there was a moment brief, like the pause between lightning and thunder, before she gathered the books into a stack. "I can put these away," she said. "Leave them," Nathan said. She left them. He poured his coffee and sat down across from her, and because he was not a man who tolerated his own curiosity very long without doing something about it, he said, "Where did you learn to read ledger books?" Eleanor looked at him. "My father taught me." "What did your father do?" She picked up her pencil again. "He was a lawyer in Boston. He taught me everything he knew because I was the only one interested in learning it." A pause. "My brothers were not studious men." "And you came west because—" "Because east wasn't an option anymore." She said it flatly with the tone of a door that has been closed politely, but firmly. "I'd rather not discuss that yet, if you don't mind." Nathan minded, but he also recognized a boundary when he ran into one, and he respected them even when they frustrated him. "All right," he said, and drank his coffee, and looked at the ledgers between them on the table. "I found something," Eleanor said after a moment. "In the books. In the loan documents I asked Holt to bring up from the barn yesterday." She opened the top ledger to a page she had marked with a strip of ribbon. "Look at this column." Nathan leaned forward. "The interest rate in your original agreement with Harrington's bank was set at 6% per annum. It was written into the contract you signed in March of 1882. She pointed to the figure with her pencil. "But if you look at the collection statements from the following year—" She turned to another page. The rate applied to your balance was 8.5%. Nathan stared at the numbers. "That's not a clerical error," Eleanor said, her voice very even. "Because it happened the same way in 3 consecutive quarters, and it was compounded on the already inflated balance, which means your total debt as of today is roughly 40% higher than it would have been under the terms you agreed to." The silence in the kitchen had weight to it. "That's fraud," Nathan said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "It is." "Can you prove it?" "With your original contract and these collection statements and probably 2 other documents I'll need to find." She looked at him directly. "Yes, I can prove it." Nathan sat back in his chair. The early morning light was coming through the window, and the ranch was starting to wake up outside. He could hear Moses talking to one of the horses, and he sat at his kitchen table, looking at his wife of 6 days, and tried to reorganize everything he thought he understood about this situation. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Eleanor held his gaze. "Because it's wrong," she said simply. "And because I can see it when most people can't. And because—" She paused, and something moved in her eyes that he couldn't quite read. "Because you didn't deserve this. Whatever else I think about this marriage, you didn't deserve what Harrington did to you." Nathan didn't say anything. "Also," Eleanor said and returned to her ledger, "it's my ranch now too, and I don't like being stolen from." By the end of the second week, the ranch hands had reached their own collective verdict on Eleanor Whitmore Cole. It happened without ceremony, the way most true things happen. Decker came in from the eastern fence line with a gash on his forearm from a loose wire bleeding through the rag he'd wrapped around it, and Eleanor was the first person he encountered in the yard. She brought him inside, cleaned the wound with carbolic acid, without flinching at his cursing, stitched it with 3 even stitches using thread and a needle from a small kit she produced from her room, bandaged it properly, and told him to keep it dry for 4 days or it would go septic. Decker had been expecting fuss or squeamishness, or at minimum the performance of concern that most people felt obligated to produce around blood. Eleanor produced none of these things. She was simply competent, brisk, and kind in the specific way that competent people are kind, by treating him like someone worth doing the job right for. He came out of the house to find Moses and Holt waiting in the yard watching the door. "She know what she's doing," he told them, and that was the whole of the verdict. Lily was a longer negotiation. The child was not deliberately cruel. She had been raised better than that, but she had the strategic coldness that children develop when they are protecting something they can't afford to lose. She would accept Eleanor's practical assistance and reject anything that felt like attachment. She would let Eleanor help her with her reading lessons and refuse to meet her eyes during them. She would eat the food Eleanor cooked without comment and leave the table before anyone else. Eleanor did not pursue her. This was the thing Nathan watched from a distance and couldn't quite account for. He had expected a woman in Eleanor's position to push to try to win the child over to manufacture warmth in the hope that manufactured warmth might become real. Instead, Eleanor moved around Lily the way a person moves around a wild thing they respect, offering, retreating, never demanding. She left books on Lily's windowsill and didn't mention it. She made sure Lily's lamp had oil without making a production of it. She learned that Lily was afraid of the dark and that the fear made her angry about being afraid. And Eleanor responded to this knowledge by simply appearing in the hallway after bedtime to check that every lamp was burning, never asking Lily whether she needed her, to never saying aloud that she had understood. Nathan saw it happening and didn't know what to call it. It looked slowly and from a careful distance like love. But it was the practical, patient kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. 3 weeks into the marriage, Harrington's attorney came to the ranch. Pierce arrived on a Wednesday afternoon unannounced, which was itself a message. He came with a paper that he described pleasantly and precisely as a routine follow-up on the terms of Nathan's loan agreement. He needed Nathan's signature on several documents. He needed them today. Nathan was out on the range when Pierce arrived. It was Eleanor who met him at the door. Pierce looked at her with the polite, practiced dismissal of a man who had learned to manage inconvenient women as a professional skill. "Mrs. Cole, I'm here to see your husband." "He's out on the range," Eleanor said. "I expect him in about 2 hours. Would you like to wait, or would you like to leave the documents with me?" Pierce produced a thin smile. "I'll wait for Nathan." "Certainly," Eleanor said. "In the meantime, would you mind if I looked them over? I've been managing the ranch accounts, and I'd like to familiarize myself with any documentation that touches the loan." The smile stayed in place, but became more careful. These are legal matters, Mrs. Cole. I'd hate for the language to be confusing. I'll try to manage, Eleanor said pleasantly. The documents, please. There was a moment, a weighted, deliberate moment, during which Pierce assessed the woman in front of him and made a calculation that Nathan could have told him was going to be wrong. He handed her the documents. Eleanor read them at the kitchen table, while Pierce drank coffee and watched her with the edgy patience of a man who expected to be bored and was beginning to suspect he wasn't going to be. She read slowly and carefully, with the concentration of someone reading for function rather than appearance, and twice she went to her room and came back with papers of her own to compare. When Nathan came in 2 hours later, still carrying the dust of the range on him, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the tableau, his wife at the table with 3 sets of documents spread in front of her, and Harrington's attorney sitting very still across from her with an expression that was working hard to stay neutral. "What's this?" Nathan asked. "Your attorney came by with some papers for you to sign," Eleanor said. She did not look up from what she was reading. "I'd recommend not signing them." Pierce stood up. "Mrs. Cole is not a party to this agreement." "She's my wife," Nathan said. "These are legal matters between you and Mr. Harrington." "Then explain them to her," Nathan said. "She's the one who reads the books." Pierce looked at Nathan. His professional pleasantness had developed a crack in it. "These documents are simply a refinancing arrangement that would extend the loan term by 3 years," Eleanor said, finally looking up, while simultaneously placing the deed to the eastern grazing land as additional collateral. "Which means that if Nathan defaults on any single payment in that 3-year period, regardless of how close to payoff he is, Harrington gets the best 120 acres of this ranch." She set the paper down. "Without giving him anything in return for the extension, without reducing the interest rate, without acknowledging the discrepancy in what's been collected versus what was agreed." Pierce was silent for a moment. "You've been very thorough, Mrs. Cole." "I have." She folded her hands on the table. "I'd like you to tell Mr. Harrington that we've reviewed the documents and will be in touch with our response, in writing, through an attorney of our choosing." "I don't believe you have an attorney." "We will," Eleanor said, and there was something in her voice, not a threat. Nothing as simple as that, more like a statement of physical fact, as certain as the declaration that water runs downhill. Pierce gathered his documents with the controlled movements of a man performing composure and left. Nathan waited until the sound of the horse's hooves had faded down the road before he turned to Eleanor. "When did you plan on telling me you could do that?" he asked. Eleanor finally let out a long, slow breath that told him she had been holding herself tighter than she'd shown. "I wasn't sure I should," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd want it." "You weren't sure I'd want you fighting my battles." "I wasn't sure you'd want to know I could." Nathan crossed to the table and looked down at the documents she'd laid out, the new papers from Pierce, beside the original loan agreement, beside her own careful notations in the margins of the ledger pages. The evidence was there in columns and dates and figures, laid out with the logical precision of someone who had been trained to build a case. "Eleanor," he said. She looked up at him. "Who are you?" The question sat between them, simple and enormous. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something working behind her eyes, the calculation of trust, the private measurement of whether this was the moment, this man, this kitchen, this fragile and strange life they were building in the ruins of something neither of them chose. She said carefully, "Someone who knows things that certain people in this county would be very unhappy to have me know. Harrington, among others." She paused. "I need you to understand that there's more to this than bad arithmetic in a loan document. What I found in your books is a small piece of something much larger. If I'm right about what I think is happening in Willow Creek..." She stopped. "Tell me," Nathan said. "Not yet," she said. "Because if I tell you and I'm wrong, I'll have frightened you for nothing. And if I tell you and I'm right..." She folded the documents carefully one by one. "Then we need to be ready before we say anything to anyone. Because the people doing this have been doing it for a long time, and they will not let it stop quietly." Nathan sat down across from her. The kitchen was very still. "You've seen this before," he said. Not a question. Eleanor's hands stilled on the papers. "Yes," she said. "I've seen it before." She didn't say where, she didn't say when. But the look on her face told Nathan that whatever she had seen before had cost her something significant, and that she was still carrying the weight of that cost in some part of herself she hadn't opened yet. He didn't push it. He sat in his kitchen with his wife of 3 weeks, a woman he hadn't chosen. A woman he hadn't wanted a woman. He was beginning to realize he had badly underestimated from the first moment she walked down the aisle of the Willow Creek church in a faded blue dress and looked at him with eyes that held no fear. Outside, the summer evening was coming down over the Cole ranch, and the cattle were settling, and somewhere inside the house his daughter Lily was reading by lamplight, and somewhere in the county, Edwin Harrington was sitting in his large, comfortable office, believing that he had managed everything perfectly. He was wrong. But that truth had not arrived yet, and in the kitchen of the house, his father built. Nathan Cole looked at the woman across the table, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, and felt the cold burn in his chest shift into something he didn't have a name for. He would find one eventually. But not tonight. Tonight, he only knew that the woman he had been forced to marry was sitting across from him in the fading light, and she was carrying something heavy, and whatever it was bigger than either of them understood. And for the first time since Harrington's letter arrived and changed everything, Nathan Cole felt something he hadn't expected to feel. He did not feel alone. The morning after Pierce left, Nathan found Eleanor's notes on the kitchen table before she was even awake. She had stayed up past midnight. He had seen the lamp burning under her door when he got up to check on Lily at 11:30, and what she had left on the table was not a few scribbled observations. It was 14 pages of careful, organized documentation. Dates in one column, figures in another. Discrepancies highlighted with small, precise marks in the margin. Nathan stood over it in the early gray light with his coffee going cold, and read through every page, and by the time he finished, he had the particular feeling of a man who has been standing on a floor he believed was solid, and has just realized there is nothing underneath it. He didn't wake her. He folded the notes carefully, put them back exactly where he'd found them, and went out to start the morning work. But the numbers stayed with him all day, the way a name stays in your head when you can't place the face persistent pulling, refusing to settle. That evening at supper, the four of them sat at the kitchen table, Nathan, Eleanor, Lily, and the specific quality of silence that had become their household's particular atmosphere. And Nathan watched Eleanor cut Lily's meat into smaller pieces, without being asked to, without drawing any attention to the act, the way a person does something they have simply noticed needs doing. Lily noticed. Nathan saw her notice. Lily didn't say anything, but she picked up her fork and ate without the usual performance of indifference. Small things. Nathan Cole was learning to watch for small things. "I want to know what you think Harrington is doing," Nathan said. "All of it." Eleanor looked up from her plate. She read his face for a moment, the way she read documents for what was actually there, not what she hoped or feared. Then she set down her fork. "Lily," she said, "would you bring in some more water from the pump?" Lily looked at Eleanor, then at her father, then back at Eleanor, with the specific expression of a child who understands she is being gently removed from a conversation. "I know something's wrong," Lily said. "I know you know," Eleanor said. "And I promise you'll understand it eventually. Right now, the adults need to talk without worrying about how much you're hearing." It was the right thing to say. Not a dismissal, an explanation. Lily pushed back her chair and went to the pump, and Nathan noted without comment that this was the first time his daughter had done what Eleanor asked without making a production out of it. Eleanor waited until the back door closed. "I think," she said carefully, "that your loan is not the only one that's been altered. I think Harrington has been running the same scheme across multiple properties in this county for at least 5 years, possibly longer." She paused. "I think the alterations are small enough in any individual case that no single rancher would necessarily catch them, especially if he's too busy working his land to spend time with a ledger. But taken together across a dozen or more properties, it adds up to a fortune," Nathan said. "It adds up to a fortune, Eleanor agreed. And it adds up to a pattern, and a pattern can be proven. You've been trying to get access to other people's loan documents. I've been trying to understand whether what I found in your books is unique or systemic. I believe it's systemic. She folded her hands on the table. But to prove it, I'd need to see someone else's paperwork. Someone else who's been struggling with their loan and can't understand why. Nathan thought about it. Carl Briggs, he said. Your neighbor. He took a loan out in '81, same bank, same period. He told me last spring that the numbers never made sense to him, but he figured he was just bad at sums. Nathan set down his own fork. Carl's not bad at sums. Eleanor looked at him steadily. Would he let me look? If I asked him? Yes. A pause. He trusted my father. He trusts me. Then we should go see Carl Briggs, Eleanor said. Soon, before Harrington decides that a woman who can read loan documents is a problem that needs managing. Nathan heard something in that last sentence, a careful flatness that told him she wasn't speaking hypothetically. Has that happened before? He asked. Someone deciding you were a problem. Eleanor picked up her fork again. I told you, she said quietly. I'm not ready to talk about that yet. The back door opened, and Lily came in with the water pitcher, and the conversation closed over like water closing over a stone, seamless and silent. But Nathan sat with what she'd said, and turned it over all through the rest of the evening. And by the time he went to bed, he had arrived at a conclusion he couldn't quite put into words yet, only a feeling sharp and specific that the woman in his house was not simply hiding a history. She was protecting one. And something had hurt her badly enough that she had come to the far edge of the country and hidden herself in plain sight for 2 years, taking in mending work above a dry goods store in a town where nobody knew her name before she arrived. He fell asleep thinking about that and dreamed for the first time in 18 months about something other than Rose. He didn't remember what it was in the morning, only that it hadn't felt like grief. They rode to Carl Briggs's property on a Thursday, Nathan and Eleanor together on horseback, which meant that by Friday morning, half of Willow Creek had some version of the story in circulation. This was the nature of small towns. Every movement was information. Every departure from routine was data. And two people from the Cole Ranch riding together in the same direction was the kind of observation that grew in the retelling. Nathan didn't care about the retelling. He had other things to think about. Carl Briggs met them at his gate with the wary, contained surprise of a man who has learned not to expect good news when neighbors arrive unannounced. He was 61, square-built, with the hands of a man who had worked his own land for 40 years. He looked at Eleanor with the careful courtesy of someone who hadn't made up his mind yet. Nathan, Mrs. Cole. He shook Nathan's hand, nodded to Eleanor. Come in out of the sun. Inside over coffee, Nathan explained what Eleanor had found. He laid it out plainly, the way his father had taught him to deliver difficult information, without embellishment, without hedging just the facts in order. Carl listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Nathan had always respected about him. When Nathan finished, Carl was quiet for a long moment. 6%, Carl said finally. I signed for 6% in March of 1882. Same terms as me, Nathan said. But I've been paying... Carl stopped, his jaw set. I always thought I was misreading the statements. Margaret used to say I was, and she was better with numbers than me, but she's been gone 4 years, and I just... He stopped again. Something moved across his face that was too old and too private for company. I just trusted that they were right. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. Mr. Briggs, would you allow me to look at your statements, your original agreement, and your payment records if you have them? Carl looked at her. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since they'd arrived. You know how to read them. Yes, sir, Eleanor said. I do. Carl got up without another word and went to the back room. They heard him moving around the sound of something being dragged a trunk or a box. He came back 15 minutes later, carrying a metal box with a latch that had rusted slightly, the kind that farmers kept important papers in because it was fireproof. He set it on the table and opened it and stepped back. Eleanor opened the first folder. Nathan watched her face while she read the way she'd taught him to read her, without her knowing she'd taught him the slight changes in her expression that most people would miss, but that he'd learned to track over the past 3 weeks. The small tightening around her eyes when she found something. The absolutely controlled way she turned the pages. She read for 22 minutes without speaking. Carl sat across from her with his hands flat on the table, watching with the patience of a man who has been waiting for something to be named for a long time. Eleanor looked up. "It's the same," she said. "The same alterations, the same compounding structure, the same dates." She looked at Carl. "Mr. Briggs, you've been overpaying this loan by nearly a third for 3 years." Carl made a sound that was not quite a word. "The amount you actually owe under the terms of the agreement you signed is roughly 40% less than what they've been telling you." Eleanor's voice was very level. "And the penalties they've threatened you with for late payment, those are calculated on the inflated balance, which means they were never legally enforceable in the first place." Carl put one hand over his mouth. He sat like that for a moment. Nathan didn't look away from him because he understood that what was moving across Carl Briggs's face was the specific grief of a man who had blamed himself for years for a problem that was never his fault, and that kind of grief deserves to be witnessed. "I thought I was just bad with money," Carl said finally, his voice coming out rougher than usual. "Margaret used to keep the books, and after she died, I figured I just didn't have her head for it. I almost sold the north pasture last spring because I thought I was so far behind." "You weren't behind," Eleanor said. "You were being stolen from." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Carl looked at Eleanor. Then he looked at Nathan. Then he looked back at Eleanor with an expression that had moved past grief into something harder and cleaner. "What do we do?" he asked. On the ride home, Eleanor was quiet for the first mile, which Nathan had learned meant she was building something in her head, constructing an argument or a sequence, laying pieces into order. He waited. "We need more," she said finally. "Carl's loan gives us 2 data points. 2 is a pattern that can be dismissed. If we can find 3 or 4 other families who took loans from Harrington's bank in that same period." "There are at least 8, Nathan said. "Maybe 10. Eleanor turned to look at him. "Harrington's been the only lender in this county willing to write frontier land loans since 1879, Nathan said. "Almost every ranching family in Willow Creek who expanded their operation in the early 80s did it on his money. I can name you 6 right now without thinking hard." Eleanor was silent for a moment. "That would make this one of the largest private fraud operations in Wyoming Territory history." "Is that a problem?" "No," she said. "It means when we bring the evidence, we bring it all. Not just 2 cases, all of them." She paused. "But it also means Harrington has more to lose than we understood, which means he'll fight harder." "He already thinks he's won," Nathan said. "He got what he wanted. He forced the marriage. He thinks he's neutralized me as a threat, and he thinks you're—" He stopped. "A woman no one will listen to," Eleanor said. "No bitterness in it, just fact." "He's miscalculated," Nathan said. Eleanor looked at him. The afternoon sun was behind them on the road, and her face was in clear, even light. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You could have said no to this. You could have stayed out of it, paid what they told you, and eventually lost the ranch slowly over the next 3 years instead of fighting." "It's my ranch," Nathan said. "It's more than that," Eleanor said. "You're choosing to make an enemy of the most powerful man in the county. That's not just practicality." Nathan rode for a moment in silence. "My father built that land," he said finally. "He worked it for 30 years. He gave it to me because he trusted me to keep it right. And I am not going to let a man like Harrington take what my father built by changing numbers on a page when no one was looking." He paused. "And these are my neighbors. Carl Briggs knew my father before I was born. Whatever Harrington's done to my loan, he's done it to Carl and to every other family who trusted that bank, and that's—" He stopped. "That's not something I can stand in front of and do nothing." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. something that had been very carefully maintained behind a professional composure and which moved now briefly before she turned back to the road. "All right," she said quietly. "Then we do all of it." 3 days later, Eleanor met Martha Delacroix at the dry goods store. It wasn't planned. Eleanor had gone in to buy lamp oil, and Martha Delacroix, 48 years old, the wife of the man who ran the South Road cattle operation, was at the counter with a look on her face that Eleanor recognized because she had learned in 2 years of living in Willow Creek to read women's faces for specific kinds of strain. The kind that comes from carrying a financial worry without being able to name it because the person you'd name it to has too much else to carry. Eleanor paid for her oil and fell into step beside Martha on the way out. "I heard about your wedding," Martha said. She said it not unkindly, but with the directness of a woman who has lived long enough not to bother with preamble. "It was unusual," Eleanor said. "Harrington's been pushing people around for years," Martha said. "My husband Bernard says we shouldn't talk about it, but Bernard also pretends our loan statements make sense, and they haven't made sense since 1883. Eleanor stopped walking. Martha stopped too and looked at her with the expression of a woman who has just heard herself say something she didn't entirely plan to say, and is waiting to see how it lands. "Would you and Bernard consider sitting down with Nathan and me?" Eleanor said. "Saturday evening, maybe. Supper." Martha studied her face. "You found something." "I found several things," Eleanor said. "And I think your statements are related to them." Martha was quiet for a moment. "Bernard doesn't like involving himself in other people's business." "This isn't other people's business," Eleanor said. "It's his business. Someone else has been making it their business without asking him." Martha put her oil and flour down on the hitching post and crossed her arms over her chest and looked at Eleanor Whitmore Cole with the exhaustive thoroughness of a woman taking the measure of another woman. What she was measuring, Eleanor understood, was not skill or intelligence. It was whether she could be trusted. "Saturday supper," Martha said finally. "I'll bring a pie." Moses figured it out before anyone else on the ranch did. Moses figured most things out before anyone else did. It was his particular gift, and he exercised it with the same quiet diligence that he exercised everything else and what he figured out on a Wednesday afternoon. 3.5 weeks after the wedding was that the dynamic in the Cole household had shifted in a way that had nothing to do with practical arrangements. He was in the barn when it happened. Nathan and Eleanor were outside near the corral fence going over the week's schedule. He wasn't trying to listen. He simply heard. "The Morrison account," Eleanor was saying, "has the same pattern, but the alteration started a year earlier than the others, which either means Morrison was targeted first as a test case, or there's a different set of documents entirely." "Eleanor." She stopped. "Have you eaten today?" A pause. "I had coffee this morning." "That's not eating." "I was working on the Morrison papers." "Come inside," Nathan said. "Holt made stew and it's been sitting an hour. The papers will still be there after supper." Another pause, longer this time. "You're going to keep doing that," Eleanor said. "Probably," Nathan said. Moses heard them come inside, and he stood in the barn for a moment with his hands still on the saddle he'd been cleaning, and felt something that was not quite a smile, but was the internal equivalent of the private satisfaction of a man who has been watching someone he respects find his footing again. He had worried about Nathan since Rose died, not in a dramatic way, not in a way he'd ever have said aloud to Nathan's face, because Nathan Cole was not a man who received that kind of concern gracefully. He had worried the quiet, particular way of a person who watches someone they care about rebuild their walls so high and so thoroughly that light stops getting through. The walls were still there, but something was getting through. Moses went back to cleaning the saddle and didn't mention it to anyone. The Saturday supper brought Bernard and Martha Delacroix to the Cole table, along with the Morrison widow. Agnes Nathan had asked her separately, and she had come alone with her husband's loan papers folded in her apron pocket, because she had nowhere else to keep important things. Carl Briggs came too, and his oldest son James, who was 26 and had the same square jaw as his father, and the specific quiet anger of a young man who has watched his family be diminished and not understood why. Eleanor had spent 2 days preparing. She had organized the documentation by family, by date, and by type of alteration. She had created a summary sheet that laid out in plain language what each family had actually agreed to pay versus what they had actually been charged, and the difference between those two figures and the cumulative total across all 4 households. That total, when Bernard Delacroix read it aloud from the summary sheet, made Agnes Morrison put her hand flat on the table and look at the ceiling for a moment. 4 years, Agnes said. James Morrison worked this land for 4 years, paying a loan that wasn't what he signed for, and he died thinking we were behind because he wasn't managing it right. Her voice was completely steady. He died thinking it was his fault. No one said anything for a moment. It wasn't his fault, Eleanor said. It was never his fault. And I need you all to understand that before we go any further, because what we're about to do is going to be difficult, and it's going to bring Harrington's attention directly to every person at this table. If any of you don't want that, you should leave now, and I will not hold it against you. Nobody left. Carl said, "What do we do?" Eleanor looked around the table. Nathan at the far end was watching her with the quiet intensity that she had learned over the past weeks was his version of full attention. The Delacroix couple were side by side, Bernard with his arms crossed and his jaw set, Martha with her hands folded and her eyes sharp. Agnes Morrison was sitting straight with a composure that had clearly cost her something to assemble. Carl and James Briggs were mirror images of each other across a generation, the same set to their shoulders. "We file a formal complaint with the Territorial Land Commission," Eleanor said, "and we take it to federal level if we have to. We go to a federal judge in Cheyenne with documentation showing systematic fraud across multiple properties in Willow Creek County. We show that the alterations follow a pattern that could not be accidental. And we show who benefited from them." A pause. "We show that Edwin Harrington has been running a land acquisition scheme, that the inflated debts were designed not to earn interest, but to manufacture defaults so that he could foreclose and accumulate land." The room was very still. Bernard Delacroix said slowly, "He wants the land. He's been buying it," Eleanor said. "Every family that's defaulted in this county in the last 5 years has lost their property to Harrington's bank. Not to other buyers. To Harrington. Always at prices well below what the land was worth, always after the family had been in debt long enough to have no other options." She let that sit. "He doesn't want your money. He never wanted your money. He wanted your land. The loans were just the mechanism for taking it." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence before. James Briggs was the one who broke it. He was 26, with the restrained fury of youth, and he said what the older people in the room were thinking, but too practiced in caution to say first. And nobody stopped him. "Nobody knew to look for it," Eleanor said. "Each of you saw your own document. None of you saw all of them together, and Harrington knew that." A pause. He counted on it. Nathan set down his coffee cup. He also counted on no one at this table having someone who could read what he'd done. Every head in the room turned toward Eleanor. She held their attention without flinching. "I need something from each of you," she said. "I need every document you have. Every original agreement, every payment statement, every letter from the bank. I need to build a complete file. It will take time. And I need your word that nothing leaves this room until we're ready to move." Bernard Delacroix looked at his wife. Martha gave the smallest nod. "You have my word," Bernard said. Agnes Morrison reached into her apron pocket and set a folded stack of papers on the table. "You have mine," she said, "and James Morrison's too, God rest him." Carl put his hand on his son's arm. James nodded. "Briggs' family's in," Carl said. Nathan looked at Eleanor from the far end of the table. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look he gave her said something that neither of them was ready to call by its right name yet, but which every other person at that table recognized with the particular recognition of people who have lived long enough to know what it looks like when two people begin to become something to each other. Eleanor turned back to the papers on the table. "Then let's get to work," she said. She worked for 2 weeks after that supper without stopping. Walsh brought her coffee without being asked. Decker fixed the broken lamp in the room she used as an office without mentioning it. Holt started leaving the barn door open when it got hot so the air moved through the house better, which was practical, and also Nathan understood a small act of accommodation, the kind men make when they have decided someone belongs in a place and they want that person to be comfortable. His daughter made her decision on a Thursday evening. Lily had been sick, nothing serious. A summer fever that broke by the second day. But the night it peaked, Lily had lain in bed with her eyes bright and glassy, and her thin hands pulling at the blanket, and Eleanor had sat beside her for 4 hours without being asked to. She had put cool cloths on Lily's forehead, had talked to her in a low, quiet voice, about nothing important about the stars you could see from the roof of the dry goods store, about what bread smelled like when you made it from scratch, about a cat she'd had in Boston named Franklin, who had opinions about everything, and Lily had listened with her eyes half closed and her breathing gradually slowing. And at some point in the small hours of the morning, she had reached out without opening her eyes and taken Eleanor's hand. Eleanor had sat in the dark holding that hand until Lily was fully asleep. Nathan had stood in the doorway for part of it. Not long enough for either of them to notice. Just long enough. By Thursday, when Lily was up and eating and back to her usual self, she came into the room Eleanor used as an office and stood in the doorway and said without preamble, "You didn't have to stay up with me." Eleanor looked up from her papers. "I know. You stayed anyway." "You were sick," Eleanor said. "Someone should be there." Lily stood in the doorway and turned this over with the serious, thorough examination she gave everything. Then she said, "What was your cat's name again?" "Franklin," Eleanor said. "He weighed 11 pounds, and he believed he was significantly larger." Lily almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come. "Can I sit in here?" Lily asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Bring your reader. I'll quiz you when I'm done with this column." Lily went to get her reader. Nathan, who had heard the whole exchange from the hallway, went out to the yard and stood in the evening air for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Feeling the particular complicated fullness of a man who is watching something he had believed was destroyed beginning slowly and uncertainly to grow again. He stood there until he could trust his face. Then he went into supper. Harrington's second move came on a Tuesday. It didn't come from Pierce this time. It came from a different direction, entirely from the Reverend Cartwright at the Baptist church on the edge of town, who delivered a Sunday sermon that managed in the way of men skilled at suggestion to speak at considerable length about the importance of women knowing their proper role in a household without ever mentioning Eleanor Cole by name. The congregation knew who he meant. By Tuesday, 3 women had stopped speaking to Eleanor at the store. The postmaster's wife made a comment in passing loudly enough to be heard about educated women who came from the East and stirred up trouble that decent folk had to live with after they were gone. 2 of the families Nathan had been planning to approach about their loan documents sent word indirectly through third parties, in the careful way of people who are afraid that they didn't want any part of whatever was being planned. Decker brought Nathan the news from town, clearly uncomfortable with the act of delivering it. Nathan found Eleanor at her desk. She had already heard Martha Delacroix had ridden over specifically to tell her arriving flushed and angry in a way that told Nathan Martha had appointed herself Eleanor's advocate, with a thoroughness that Harrington probably hadn't anticipated. "He's trying to isolate us," Eleanor said. She said it calmly with the clinical recognition of someone who has seen the move before. "Make people afraid to be associated with us before we have a chance to show them what we have. Is it working?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. 2 families backed out. 3 more are nervous. She set down her pen. "But we have what we have, and what we have is enough if we use it correctly." "What do? We move faster than he expected us to." She looked up. "I need to go to Cheyenne." The room shifted. "There's a federal land commissioner's office in Cheyenne," Eleanor said. "And there's a federal judge who has jurisdiction over territorial land fraud cases." She paused. "If I go in person with the full documentation package and file formally." "Harrington will know immediately," Nathan said. "He has people in Cheyenne." "I know." "Eleanor, "I know," she said again, and this time there was something in her voice, not fear, but the specific weight of someone who has calculated a risk and chosen to carry it. "Nathan, I've been running from men like Harrington for 2 years. I am done running. I would rather stand in front of this thing and fight it than spend another day waiting for him to find the right angle to come at us from." Nathan looked at her. She looked back at him. "Then we go to Cheyenne," he said. "Both of us." Eleanor blinked. "You can't leave the ranch?" "Moses can run the ranch for a week. He's done it before." Nathan stood up. "You're not going alone. That's not—" He stopped, chose a different word. "That's not how we're doing this." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face that she usually kept carefully sealed moved just slightly, like a curtain touched by wind. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Nathan said. "Tell me what to pack." He was already moving toward the door when he heard her behind him let out a breath that told him she had been holding it for longer than this conversation, longer than this week, possibly since before she ever walked into his life on the day everyone in Willow Creek came to watch them fail. He didn't turn around. He let her have the moment. Outside, the summer was going to gold at the edges, the way Wyoming did when August started thinking about September, and Nathan Cole went to find Moses with something that felt, if he was being precise about it, a great deal like purpose. They left for Cheyenne on a Wednesday before sunrise. Moses stood at the gate when the wagon pulled out, and he didn't say anything, which was how Nathan knew he understood the stakes. Moses had been told only what he needed to know, that there was business with the Territorial Commission, that it was serious that he was in charge until they returned. He had nodded once and gone to saddle the horses, and that had been the whole conversation. Some things between men who trust each other don't require more words than that. Lily had been harder. Nathan had told her the night before, sitting on the edge of her bed, in the way he had since she was small, and Lily had listened with that particular stillness she had that could mean anything from acceptance to quiet devastation. When he finished, she didn't ask about the ranch, or about Moses, or about how long they'd be gone. She asked, "Is Eleanor going to be safe?" Nathan had looked at his daughter and felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm going to make sure of it," he said. Lily had thought about this for a moment. Then she had said with the directness of someone who has decided to stop pretending, "She stayed up all night when I had the fever. Did you know that?" "I know," Nathan said. "She held my hand." "I know that too." Lily pulled her blanket up to her chin. "Don't let anything happen to her," she said. "She's finally starting to learn how to garden right, and I don't want to have to teach someone else from the beginning." Nathan had kissed his daughter on the forehead and gone to finish packing. Now, 2 hours out on the road to Cheyenne, with the sky going from black to gray. Ahead of them, he told Eleanor what Lily had said. He didn't plan to. It came out the way things come out at that hour of morning, when defenses are low and the world is still quiet enough that true things find their way to the surface without being called. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment after he told her. "She's a remarkable child," Eleanor said finally. "She's her mother's daughter," Nathan said, and then because that was true, but also incomplete. "She's her own person too. She's something Rose never was. Rose was gentle. Lily's," he searched for the word. "Fierce," Eleanor said. "Fierce." Nathan agreed. "Yeah." They drove on through the lightening morning, and the silence between them had the quality it had been slowly acquiring over the past weeks, not the empty silence of strangers, but the inhabited silence of two people who have run out of the need to fill every space with words. Eleanor said, "I need to tell you something before we get to Cheyenne." Nathan kept his eyes on the road. "All right." "About why I came west." A pause. "About what I told you when you asked who I was." "You don't have to." "I do," she said. "Because where we're going, and what we're about to do, there's a possibility that Harrington already has people looking into my background. And if they find it before you hear it from me," she stopped, "I don't want you to learn it from someone who will tell it wrong." Nathan said nothing. He waited. Eleanor looked at the road ahead and began. My father was Clarence Whitmore. He was a senior partner at one of the most respected legal firms in Boston, Whitmore and Aldrich. He spent 30 years building that practice, and I spent 30 years watching him build it, and he taught me everything he knew, because I was the only one of his children who wanted to learn. She paused. In 1881, he took on a case against a man named Gerald Forsyth. Forsyth ran a banking consortium out of Boston that had been defrauding investors for 7 years, not the same scheme as Harrington's, but the same fundamental structure. Small alterations. Compounding fraud. A pattern that was invisible unless you looked at multiple accounts together. Nathan was very still on the wagon seat beside her. My father found the pattern, Eleanor said. I helped him build the case. I spent 8 months going through documents that Forsyth's people had tried to make inaccessible. I knew how to look for the same things I found in your ledger, Nathan, because I had looked for them before. We were 3 weeks from filing when... She stopped. Her voice had stayed level through all of it, and it stayed level now, but he could hear what the levelness was costing. Forsyth's people went after my father, not legally, personally. They found things, some real, some fabricated, and they used them. They went to every client my father's firm had. They went to the newspapers. They destroyed his reputation in the space of about 3 months. A pause. The case collapsed. Without my father's credibility, the evidence didn't hold. Forsyth walked away. My father. Another pause longer. He died 8 months later. His heart, the doctor said. But I knew. Nathan turned to look at her. I was supposed to be the woman who proved his case, Eleanor said. Instead, I watched his enemies take everything he built. And when they were done with him, they started on me. Made it known in Boston that I was trouble. That I was the kind of woman who tried to involve herself in men's business and got innocent people hurt. Her jaw was set. I couldn't find work. I couldn't find rooms. I couldn't find anyone who would speak to me in the circles where I'd grown up. So I left. She paused. I came as far west as I could get, and I found the smallest town I could stand, and I told myself I was done, that I was going to live quietly and not fight anything anymore, and just... She stopped. And then Harrington forced you into a marriage, Nathan said quietly. And then Harrington forced me into a marriage, Eleanor agreed, and I found your books, and it was the same thing, the same mechanism, the same math. She turned to look at him directly for the first time since she'd started talking. I wasn't planning to fight again. I told myself I was just going to help you understand your own accounts and then step back. But the further I looked, the more I found, and... She stopped. You couldn't stop, Nathan said. No, Eleanor said. I couldn't stop. He looked at her face in the early morning light, the set of it, the composure that had cost her so much and was still costing her. And he thought about what it meant that she was sitting in this wagon, going toward the thing that had destroyed her father, with the same documents in her bag, and the same odds against her, and the same knowledge that if Harrington came after them, the way Forsyth had come after Clarence Whitmore, the damage would not be limited to ledger entries. Eleanor, he said. I know what you're going to say, she said. That it's too dangerous. That we should... That's not what I was going to say. She stopped. I was going to say, Nathan said carefully, that you are the bravest person I have met in a long time, and I'm sorry about your father. Eleanor looked at him. Something in her face broke open just slightly, the way ice breaks on a creek in early spring. Not catastrophic, just the first crack that means something underneath has started moving. Thank you, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. How much did they know about you in Boston? Nathan asked. Forsyth's people. How much did they document? Enough. She steadied her voice. They knew I had helped build the case. They knew I understood the documents. They'll know who I am, Nathan. If Harrington has anyone in Cheyenne worth their salary, they may already know. Then we move fast, Nathan said. We get to the commissioner's office before anyone has time to warn them about us. We file everything in one action, all the documentation, all the families, everything together, so it can't be picked apart one piece at a time. Eleanor looked at him. You understand that once we file, there's no taking it back. I don't want to take it back. Harrington will come at us. Not through the courts first, through reputation, through the town. He'll do what Forsyth did. Let him try, Nathan said, and there was something in his voice that was not bravado. It was quieter than bravado and more certain. He already forced me to marry a woman I'd never met to save my land. My reputation in this county has seen worse mornings. He paused. And this time the woman standing next to me actually knows what she's doing. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. And then something happened that Nathan had not seen before in all their weeks of careful practical proximity. Eleanor Whitmore Cole smiled. Not the controlled professional expression she deployed in difficult conversations. A real one, quick and unguarded, that changed her whole face. She turned back to the road before he could look at it too long. But he had seen it, and he drove the next 20 miles thinking about it more than he should have. Date. The Federal Land Commissioner's office in Cheyenne occupied the second floor of a stone building on Ferguson Street, and the man who ran it was named Commissioner Dale Harker, 60 years old, thick through the middle, with the specific exhaustion of a man who had spent decades in government service and had long since stopped expecting the work to be interesting. He became interested very quickly. Eleanor set the documentation on his desk in the order she had organized it, which was not the order of the individual families, but the order of the fraud mechanism itself. The original template. Then the alteration pattern. Then the evidence of how the pattern repeated across each account. Then the cumulative calculation of fraudulent charges. Then the connection to Harrington's land acquisition record, showing which foreclosed properties had ended up in his ownership at below market prices. Harker looked at the first 3 pages without speaking. Then he looked up at Eleanor. Then he looked at Nathan. Then he called through the open door for his clerk to come in and bring the territorial land records for Willow Creek County going back to 1879. The clerk was gone for 8 minutes. When he came back with 3 ledger volumes, Harker was still on page 7 of Eleanor's documentation. "Who compiled this?" Harker asked without looking up. "I did," Eleanor said. Harker looked up. He looked at her with the particular assessment of a man who is recalibrating his expectations in real time. "You're familiar with territorial land law." "With federal land law as well," Eleanor said. "My father was Clarence Whitmore of Whitmore and Aldrich in Boston." Something moved in Harker's expression. "I know that name." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I expect you might." Harker held her gaze for a moment. Then he went back to reading. He read for 40 minutes without interruption. Nathan sat to one side and watched Harker's face move through a progression that started with professional interest and arrived somewhere that looked a great deal like controlled anger. At the 30-minute mark, Harker turned back 3 pages and reread a section, and Nathan saw his jaw set. At the 40-minute mark, Harker closed the last folder and looked at Eleanor. "If this documentation is accurate," he said carefully, "and I want to be precise about what I mean when I say accurate, if these figures have been correctly calculated, and these documents are genuine originals, then what you're describing is systematic territorial fraud on a scale that would require federal prosecution." "It is accurate," Eleanor said, "and they are genuine. I can provide you with the original signatures of each family who has brought their documents to us and with their sworn testimony if you require it." "I'll require it," Harker said, "and I'll want my own examiner to verify the calculations independently." He paused. "This will take time, Mrs. Cole. I want you to understand that. Even with what you've brought me today, building a federal case, getting a judge to hear it, getting Harrington served with proper notice." "How much time?" Nathan asked. Harker considered it. 6 to 8 weeks minimum. More likely 3 months to a first hearing. Nathan looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Nathan. "We can hold for 3 months," Eleanor said. "You understand that once I begin this inquiry, Harrington will know about it," Harker said. "I cannot control that. He has associates in this city, and the moment I begin pulling territorial land records on Willow Creek County, it will not remain private." "We understand," Nathan said. Harker nodded slowly. He picked up Eleanor's documentation and set it precisely to one side of his desk, the side Nathan noticed where he kept things that he was going to act on. "I'll need the sworn statements within 2 weeks," he said. "Every family, every signature. Can you do that?" "Yes," Eleanor said. Harker looked at her once more. "Your father," he said, "was a good lawyer, Mrs. Cole. I knew of his work before the Forsyth business." A pause. "I know what was done to him. I'm sorry for it." Eleanor held his gaze. "Don't be sorry," she said quietly. "Help me finish what he started." Harker picked up his pen. "Let's begin," he said. They were back on the road to Willow Creek by 4 in the afternoon. Nathan drove, and Eleanor sat beside him, and for the first hour, neither of them spoke because they were both still inside the magnitude of what they had just done. Filing with Harker had felt like stepping off a cliff edge, not in the sense of falling, but in the sense of having committed to a direction from which there was no easy return. The paper trail existed now. The government had Eleanor's documentation. Commissioner Harker had her name, and Nathan's name, and the names of every family who had brought their accounts to the Cole kitchen table. It was real. It was irreversible. And somewhere in Cheyenne by nightfall, Edwin Harrington was going to know about it. "He'll move fast," Eleanor said. She said it to the road ahead, thinking out loud in the way she did when she was working through something. "He'll want to discredit us before Harker's examiner has a chance to verify the documents. He'll go for reputation first, probably start with the Forsyth story. Make it look like I'm a woman with a pattern of making accusations against respectable businessmen." She paused. "He might approach the other families. Try to pressure them into withdrawing before they give sworn statements." "Carl Briggs won't withdraw," Nathan said. "I know, but the families who were already nervous. We go to them first," Nathan said, "before Harrington's people can get to them. We get back tomorrow, we start making visits that same afternoon." Eleanor nodded. Then she said, "Nathan, there's something else, something I didn't want to put in the formal documentation because I'm not certain yet, and I don't want to make an allegation I can't prove." Nathan turned to look at her. "I think Pierce has been doing this in other counties," she said. "I think Harrington's scheme in Willow Creek is a template. I think they've run the same operation in at least 2 other Wyoming counties, and possibly in Colorado as well." She paused. "If that's true, then what we've filed today is not the whole picture. It's one piece of something much larger." The wagon moved through the evening quiet. "How certain are you?" Nathan asked. "Not certain enough to have put it in front of Harker today," Eleanor said, "but certain enough that I've been losing sleep over it." A pause. "If I'm right and Harrington understands that I might be looking at the larger operation, not just Willow Creek, then we're not just a threat to one county land scheme. We're a threat to everything he's built." "Which means he has more reason to come at us hard," Nathan said. "Yes." Nathan processed this for a moment. The road had gone dark around them, and the horses were moving steady, and the Wyoming stars were starting to appear in the way they did out here, one at a time, and then all at once, the whole enormous sky filling up overhead. "Tell me everything you suspect," Nathan said. "All of it. I'm done being told only the parts I'm ready for." Eleanor looked at him. In the dark, with only starlight, her face was still readable to him. He had learned it over these weeks, the way a person learns a landscape they cross every day. The small calculations, the decision. "All right," she said. "All right." She talked for the next 2 hours and Nathan listened, and by the time they pulled up to the Cole Ranch gate, the stars were fully out, and Moses was waiting with a lamp, and the picture of what Edwin Harrington had been building in Wyoming territory was larger and darker than anything Nathan had allowed himself to imagine. Harrington made his first move 4 days after they returned. It came through the newspaper. The Willow Creek Gazette was a small operation, 4 pages twice weekly, run by a man named Arthur Pratt, who had the ideals of a good editor and the financial situation of a man who owed money to the same bank as everyone else. What appeared on the front page of the Wednesday edition was not an accusation directly. Pratt was too careful for that, but it was a story about the concerns of the business community regarding individuals who made reckless allegations against respected institutions. And it contained several details about Eleanor's background in Boston that could only have come from Harrington. It named Forsyth. It named the failed case. It called Clarence Whitmore's reputation complicated. It described Eleanor, without quite saying so, as a woman who had arrived in Willow Creek under false pretenses and was now stirring up trouble among the farming families for reasons of her own that had nothing to do with their interests. Nathan read it at the kitchen table with a controlled stillness that told Eleanor he was furious. Eleanor read it, standing up, leaning against the counter, and her face went through several things in rapid succession: recognition, a particular tired anger, and then something that settled into a composure that was not defeat. She had seen this before. She knew its shape. "He's faster than I expected," she said. "He had this ready," Nathan said. "He had the information about Boston assembled before we even went to Cheyenne. He was waiting to use it." "Yes." She set the paper down. "He was waiting to see if we'd actually file, and when we did, he had this ready to print." "Pratt didn't want to run it," Nathan said. "I'd bet money on that." "He may not have had a choice," Eleanor said. "If Harrington holds his mortgage—" She stopped. "We need to find out who else in Willow Creek has a loan with Harrington's bank. Not just the ranching families, the tradespeople, the store owners, the newspaper. If he owns the town's debt," Nathan said slowly, "he can apply pressure on anyone he wants." "He can apply pressure on everyone he wants," Eleanor corrected. "That's the point. That was always the point. The land was the end goal, but control of the debt was the mechanism. You control the debt, you control the town." They stood in the kitchen with that understanding settling between them like sediment after disturbed water, slowly, clearly into the shape of something that had been there all along, but was only now visible. "We have to move faster than 3 months," Nathan said. "I know." Eleanor picked up her coffee cup. Put it down without drinking. "I need to talk to Agnes Morrison. She mentioned once that her husband had a letter from someone, a rancher in Laramie County, who wrote to him describing the same loan problems. James Morrison wrote back, but then he died, and Agnes didn't know what to do with the correspondence." Eleanor looked at Nathan. "If that letter exists, and if the Laramie County situation matches our documentation pattern, we have interstate fraud. Not territorial fraud, federal fraud. Harker won't need 3 months for that. The jurisdiction changes everything." Nathan was already standing up from the table. "I'll saddle the horses." "Nathan," she started. "Agnes Morrison is 12 miles away," Nathan said. "We're not waiting until tomorrow." He stopped in the doorway. "Unless you need time." "No," Eleanor said. "Get the horses." Agnes Morrison found the letters. There were 3 of them, bundled with a strip of leather in the back of the tin box beneath the loan documents Eleanor had already catalogued. The correspondent was a rancher named Thomas Greer from Laramie County, and James Morrison had known him from his cattle driving days. The letters were dated 1882 and 1883, and Greer described in the plain-spoken way of a practical man trying to make sense of something that didn't add up exactly the same pattern of loan discrepancies that Eleanor had documented in Willow Creek. Same bank, different county, same mechanism. Eleanor read all 3 letters at Agnes Morrison's kitchen table and did not speak for several minutes after she finished. Agnes sat across from her. "Do you know what it means?" "It means Harrington is bigger than one county," Eleanor said. "It means this has been operating at a scale that makes what we've documented look like the visible part of something much deeper." "Is that good or bad?" Agnes asked. "It's both," Eleanor said. "It's better for the federal case. It means Commissioner Harker will have to treat this as a matter of significant public concern, not just a local dispute." She paused. "It's worse for us personally. Because if Harrington understands that we've found the Laramie connection—" The door of the Morrison house opened. All 3 of them, Eleanor, Nathan, Agnes, turned. James Briggs stood in the doorway. He had ridden hard. His horse was breathing rough outside, and he had the look of a man who had come with bad news and hadn't found a way to soften it on the ride over. "There are men at the coal ranch," James said. "3 of them. Arrived about an hour after you left. They told Moses they're from the bank. They have a document they say gives them the right to conduct an inventory of the property." Nathan was on his feet. "Moses wouldn't let them in the house," James said quickly. "Decker and Holt are with him, but they're standing at the gate and they're not leaving, and—" He stopped. "And Lily's at the ranch," Nathan said. "Yes, sir." Nathan was already moving. Eleanor was right behind him. She said to Agnes as she moved through the door, "Keep those letters. Keep them somewhere safe that isn't this house. Can you do that?" Agnes Morrison, who had spent 4 years quietly managing a grief that would have broken most people, looked at Eleanor with clear eyes. "I'll ride to Martha Delacroix tonight," she said. "She can keep them." "Good," Eleanor said. "Go now, Agnes. Don't wait." Nathan was already on his horse. Son. They covered 12 miles in a time that the horses would feel for the next 2 days. Nathan hit the ranch gate at a canter and pulled up hard when he saw the situation. 3 men on horseback near the gate, dressed in the particular way of men who wanted to look official without actually being official. Moses was standing at the gate post with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has not moved and has no intention of moving. Decker was 6 feet to Moses's left, with a shovel in his hands, which was technically a farming implement, and technically not a weapon, and was very clearly both. One of the 3 men was Pierce. The other 2 were strangers, bigger, quieter, with the particular stillness of men whose job was to make their physical presence feel like a statement. Pierce looked at Nathan as he pulled up. "Mr. Cole, we've been waiting." "I see that," Nathan said. His voice was completely even. "What's in the document, Pierce?" "A legal instrument authorizing a property assessment on behalf of Harrington Land and Banking regarding the status of your loan agreement." "Let me see it," Eleanor said. She had pulled up beside Nathan and she held out her hand without getting off her horse. Pierce looked at her with the expression he always wore around Eleanor, professional controlled, and about a 1/4 inch short of genuine composure. "Mrs. Cole, this is a legal matter between the bank and your husband." "My husband's name is on the deed and so is mine," Eleanor said. "We amended the property registration after the wedding. I believe you know that since your office filed the marriage certificate." She kept her hand out. "The document, please." The 2 large strangers looked at Pierce. Pierce, to his credit, maintained his professional expression. He produced the document from his coat and handed it to Eleanor. Eleanor read it on horseback. It took her less than 90 seconds. "This is not a legal instrument," she said and handed it back. "It's a letter on bank stationery. It has no seal, no judicial signature, and no authority under territorial law to compel access to private property." She looked at Pierce. "You know that." Pierce said nothing. "You're going to leave now," Eleanor said, and her voice had something in it that was not quite anger. It was colder than anger and more precise. The voice of someone who has calculated exactly how much ground they stand on and found it solid. "And you're going to tell Edwin Harrington that this approach didn't work. And then you're going to tell him that we've been to Cheyenne and that Commissioner Harker has our documentation and that it includes material from Laramie County as well as Willow Creek." Something moved in Pierce's face. "Tell him," Eleanor said, "that he's out of time for small moves." Pierce held her gaze for a long moment. Then he folded the document, put it back in his coat, and turned his horse. The 2 strangers followed. Nathan watched them go down the road until they were past the first bend. Moses let out a long breath. "She always going to do things like that?" he said to Nathan without looking away from the road. "Probably," Nathan said. "Good," Moses said, and turned back to the barn. Nathan looked at Eleanor. She was still watching the road, her hands relaxed on the reins now that the men were gone. He could see the slight tremble in them, not fear, he understood, but the physical release of adrenaline that had been held in check through pure will. "Lily?" she asked. "I'll check," Nathan said. "I'll come with you." They found Lily on the kitchen floor with a book in her lap, exactly where she had apparently been for the entire duration, with the peaceful absorption of a child who had decided not to be worried. She looked up when they came in. "Moses told me to stay inside," she said. "I stayed inside." "Good girl," Nathan said. Lily looked at Eleanor. "Are they gone?" "They're gone," Eleanor said. Lily nodded. She looked back at her book. Then, without looking up, Eleanor. "Yes. You were scared, weren't you? A little bit?" A pause. "A little bit," Eleanor admitted. "But you didn't show it." "No." Lily turned a page. "I'm going to do that too," she said, "when I grow up. Not show it." Eleanor looked at Nathan. He looked at Eleanor. "You already do," Eleanor told Lily. "You've been doing it since the day I arrived." Lily considered this, turned another page, and slowly, carefully, as though she was trying the action out for the first time and wasn't entirely sure how it would land, she smiled. It was the first real smile she had given Eleanor. Nathan watched it happen and felt something in his chest that he had no adequate word for, something that had started as gratitude and was becoming something wider and deeper and more permanent. The way a river changes its course slowly, and then all at once. And then you cannot quite remember the shape of the land before the water found its new direction. He stood in his kitchen with his wife and his daughter, and the weight of the fight ahead of them, and he thought about Eleanor's hands trembling on the reins after Pierce rode away, and the way she had held her voice steady through every second of it, and the years she had spent alone with a grief she never put words to, and the father she had lost fighting the same battle she was fighting now. He had been forced to marry a stranger. Somewhere in the past 7 weeks, without his consent and without announcement, that stranger had become the most important person in his house. He had not said it yet. He was not ready to say it yet. But he knew it the way a man knows winter is coming before the first frost falls in the body, before the mind catches up. Outside, Moses was talking to the horses the way he always did at evening, low and steady, and the ranch was settling into its night sounds. And somewhere down the road, Edwin Harrington was learning that the woman he had dismissed as an old maid had just outmaneuvered him in front of his own attorney. Nathan Cole went to put the kettle on. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. But tonight in the kitchen, his father built with lamplight on the faces of the people who had become against all reasonable expectation. His family tonight felt for the first time in a long time like something worth fighting for. The sworn statements took 11 days to collect. Nathan and Eleanor rode out every morning and came back every evening, and in between, they sat at kitchen tables across the county and watched people sign their names to documents that said in the plain language Eleanor had insisted on exactly what had been done to them and exactly how long it had been happening. Some of them cried. Some of them were angry in the particular way of people who have been angry for a long time without knowing where to aim it. Some of them, the older ones, the ones who had watched the county change around them and had quietly adjusted their expectations downward, year by year. Some of them just sat very still after they signed and looked at the document like they were trying to make themselves believe it was real. 8 families in total. 8 signed statements. 8 sets of original loan documents with the alterations marked in Eleanor's precise hand. On the 11th day, a rancher named Gerald Pruitt, who lived on the far north edge of the county, came to the Cole Ranch uninvited. He was 70 years old and had been in Willow Creek longer than anyone except Carl Briggs, and he stood at the door with his hat in his hands and told Nathan that he had heard what was being done and that he had a loan from Harrington's Bank from 1879, and that he had lost his South 40 acres to foreclosure in 1881. And had believed ever since that it was his own fault. Eleanor brought him inside. She sat across from him and looked at his documents for 35 minutes, and when she looked up, her expression told Nathan everything before she said a word. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "you didn't lose that land because you failed. You lost it because the debt you were carrying was mathematically impossible to repay on the terms you were actually given." She turned the document so he could see what she was pointing to. "The rate they applied to your balance in the first year of collection was nearly double what you signed for. You were behind before your first full year of payments was complete. There was no version of this where you kept that land. They made sure of that before the ink was dry. Pruitt looked at the document. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. He was a lean man, weathered in the deep way of people who have spent decades outdoors, and his hands on the table were the hands of someone who had worked every day of his adult life. His jaw moved once tightly, and then he was still again. 70 years old? He said finally, almost to himself. I thought I'd just gotten old and slow and lost my head for business. He paused. My son moved to Colorado because he thought there was no future in this county. I told him he was right to go. Write to your son, Eleanor said quietly. Tell him what we've found. Pruitt looked at her. You really think you can beat Harrington? I think we already have the evidence to beat him, Eleanor said. What I'm not sure of yet is whether we can do it before he finds a way to stop us. Pruitt was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper, old and soft at the creases. I kept the original. Always kept the original. Wasn't sure why, I just always felt like... He stopped. Like something wasn't right. Even when I couldn't say what. He put the paper on the table. That's my copy of the agreement, from 1879. Do what you need to with it. Eleanor looked at the document. Then she looked at Pruitt with an expression that Nathan had come to recognize, the one she wore when she had found something that changed the calculation. Mr. Pruitt, she said carefully, how many people do you know in this county who took loans from Harrington's bank before 1881? Pruitt thought about it. 6, maybe 7. Could you bring them to us? Some of them have already lost their land, Pruitt said. Already sold out and moved on. I know, Eleanor said, but if any of them kept their documents... I'll ask, Pruitt said. He stood up and put his hat back on with the deliberate movement of a man who has made a decision and is already in motion. I'll ask tonight. He was at the door when Nathan said, Mr. Pruitt. The old man turned. I'm sorry it took this long, Nathan said. For someone to look. Pruitt held his gaze for a moment. You're looking now, he said. That counts. He left, and Nathan and Eleanor stood in the kitchen in the particular charged quiet that had become familiar over these 11 days, the silence of people who are working at the edge of what they can manage and know it, and are going to keep working anyway. 12 families, Nathan said. With Pruitt's 1879 documents, we can push the start date of the fraud back by at least 2 years. That changes the federal statute of limitations question. It changes everything about the scope of what Harker can charge. It also means Harrington has been doing this for at least 7 years, Eleanor said. Not 5. She sat down at the table. Nathan, this is bigger than I originally thought. When I said I thought there were other counties involved. You were right, Nathan said. I was right, she agreed. And if Harker's examiner has been doing what he said he'd do, he's been pulling land records across the territory, and he's probably already found patterns in Laramie and Carbon counties that match ours. She looked at the stack of documents on the table. We need to get all of this to Cheyenne, not in 2 weeks, now. Nathan didn't argue. I'll have Moses ready the wagon tonight. They were 2 hours from leaving when Harrington himself came to the ranch. Not Pierce this time. Not strangers with fabricated documents. Edwin Harrington in person, in his best coat, driving his own buggy up the Cole Ranch Road at midday, like a man who had decided that the only way to manage a situation was to look it in the face. Nathan stepped out to meet him. Harrington climbed down from the buggy with the easy physical confidence of a large man who has never had reason to doubt that space would be made for him. He looked at Nathan with something that was trying to be pleasantness and was not quite making it. Nathan, he said, I'd like to talk. Talk, Nathan said. He did not move from where he was standing. He did not offer his hand. Harrington's pleasantness adjusted slightly. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot, you and I. I'm willing to admit that the circumstances of your marriage were handled poorly. A man in my position sometimes moves too quickly. I was trying to help you, Nathan. I've always wanted to help you. You altered my loan documents, Nathan said. That's not help. A pause. Figures can be misread, Harrington said. Accounting errors happen. If there's been a discrepancy in your statements, I'm prepared to have my people review it. Make it right, retroactively if necessary. Your offer, Nathan said, is about 6 weeks too late. Harrington's pleasant expression worked a little harder. I understand you've been talking to Commissioner Harker in Cheyenne. I have. That's a serious step, Nathan. The kind of step that has consequences for everyone involved. For you, for your wife. A pause that was weighted with specific precision. For your daughter. The air between them changed. Nathan looked at Harrington for a long moment. Are you threatening my daughter? I'm pointing out, Harrington said carefully, that a legal proceeding of this nature is disruptive for an entire family, especially for a child who has already lost one parent. Get off my land, Nathan said. Nathan, get off my land, Nathan said again. His voice had not risen. It had done the opposite, gone quieter and more absolute, the way a man's voice goes when he has passed the point of managing his anger and reached the point of simply being certain. And tell your attorney, and whoever wrote that newspaper piece, and whoever has been pressuring the families in this county to withdraw their statements, tell all of them that what you just said to me about my daughter is now part of what I'm going to describe to Commissioner Harker when I see him tomorrow morning. Harrington went still. Because threatening a federal witness's family, Nathan said, is a different kind of crime than loan fraud. It's the kind that federal judges take personally. Harrington looked at him. Something in his face had shifted. The pleasantness was entirely gone now, and what was underneath it was not quite what Nathan had expected. It was not rage. It was the expression of a man recalculating rapidly in real time, and not liking where the calculation was landing. You don't understand what you're doing, Harrington said. His voice was lower now. The performance had dropped away. I have been building something in this territory for 15 years, not just land, a structure, a system. You pull this one thread and it doesn't just affect me, it affects everyone who's been operating inside it. The men in Cheyenne who look the other way. The bank examiners who've been on my payroll for 3 years. The territorial legislators who've been receiving... He stopped himself. Nathan had gone absolutely still. Harrington realized what he had just said. The two men looked at each other. I'd like you to leave now, Nathan said quietly. Harrington left. He left fast without the composed dignity he'd arrived with, climbing into his buggy and moving down the road with the urgent purposefulness of a man who has just made a serious error and knows it, and is already calculating the damage. Eleanor appeared beside Nathan. She had heard everything. She had been standing just inside the door, and she had heard every word, and Nathan could see from her face that she had understood even faster than he had the specific significance of what Harrington had let slip. Legislative bribery, she said. He said legislators. He stopped himself. He didn't stop himself fast enough. Eleanor's voice was very controlled. Nathan, if he's been paying territorial legislators, then this isn't just a fraud case. This is a corruption case. This is the kind of case that removes men from office and rewrites the regulatory structure of an entire territory. She paused. This is the kind of case that people try to bury. Or the kind of case that can't be buried, Nathan said. If Harker already has what we brought him, and now we add witness testimony about legislative bribery. We need to leave for Cheyenne tonight, Eleanor said. Not tomorrow, tonight. Agreed. Nathan turned toward the barn. I'll tell Moses. Nathan. He stopped. He came here to offer you a way out, Eleanor said. He came here to give you the chance to make this stop in exchange for something. He knew you'd refuse. I think he expected you'd refuse, but he came anyway. Which means he's worried. For the first time in this whole thing, Harrington is genuinely worried. Nathan looked at her. Is that good? It's good that he's worried, Eleanor said. It's dangerous that he's worried. Worried men make unpredictable moves. She held his gaze. Be ready for anything. They reached Cheyenne at dawn. Commissioner Harker was not in his office yet when they arrived, but his clerk was, and the clerk looked up when Eleanor walked through the door with 12 sets of loan documents and a handwritten account of what Harrington had said on the Cole Ranch Road, and the clerk sent for Harker immediately without being asked. Harker arrived 20 minutes later, still buttoning his coat, which told Nathan that the clerk's message had communicated urgency accurately. Eleanor put everything on his desk. The 12 families' documents. The Pruitt 1879 papers that pushed the fraud timeline back 2 additional years. The Greer letters from Laramie County. And her written account of Harrington's words, the reference to bank examiners on his payroll, the reference to territorial legislators. Harker read it all standing up, which was how Nathan knew this was different from their first meeting. He said legislators, Harker said. Plural. Eleanor confirmed. Harker set the papers down. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Nathan. He looked back at Eleanor with the expression of a man who has just realized that what he thought was a river is actually the mouth of something much larger. "This moves out of my jurisdiction," Harker said. "If there is credible evidence of territorial legislative corruption connected to this fraud scheme, this goes to the federal attorney's office. Today." "Good," Eleanor said. "The federal attorney is Judge Wallace Price," Harker said. "He is not a man who moves slowly once he is given a reason to move." "But Mrs. Cole," he paused, "I need you to understand that once I take this to Price, the speed of proceedings will no longer be in my control. Things will happen quickly, and Harrington will have limited time to respond before the weight of a federal inquiry comes down. That means the window in which he might try to act against you personally." "I understand," Eleanor said. "We're ready." Harker looked at her for a long moment. "Your father would have been very proud," he said. Eleanor held his gaze. "I know," she said. "Let's make sure it means something this time." Tant. They were back in Willow Creek by the following evening, and the town they came back to was already different. Word travels in small places, the way fire travels in dry grass, low and fast, and in every direction at once, and what had reached Willow Creek ahead of Nathan and Eleanor's return was a version of events that Harrington's people had clearly worked to shape. The story going around was that Cole and his wife had made reckless allegations to a federal official, and that the federal official had sent them home with nothing, and that anyone who had been foolish enough to sign their names to the Cole documents should expect consequences. It was a good story. It was a plausible story. And for about 48 hours, it worked on the people who were inclined to be afraid. Then Carl Briggs rode into town. Carl was not a man who made speeches. He had not made a speech in the 10 years Nathan had known him, as far as Nathan was aware. But Carl Briggs walked into the Willow Creek General Store on a Thursday morning when it had its usual Thursday crowd, and he said in the flat and carrying voice of a man who has been quiet for too long that he had signed his name to Eleanor Cole's documents because every figure in them was true, and that he had received a letter this morning. Nathan showed it to him. The letter had come from Harker's office, confirming that a federal inquiry had been opened, and that the inquiry covered not just Willow Creek County, but 2 additional Wyoming counties, and material from Colorado as well. The Thursday crowd at the general store was 12 people. By Saturday, the whole county knew. Bernard Delacroix came by the ranch to tell Nathan with the particular satisfaction of a man delivering information he's been looking forward to delivering. "The postmaster's wife is on your side now," he said. "She told me herself, said she'd been afraid of Harrington for 3 years, and she was done with it." "What changed her mind?" Nathan asked. "Carl," Bernard said simply. "People trust Carl. He's been here since before most of us." Eleanor, who was at her desk when Bernard delivered this report, looked up. "How is Arthur Pratt at the Gazette handling it?" Bernard's expression shifted into something more complicated. "Pratt came to see me yesterday. He wanted to know if he was trying to ask without asking whether you had anything that showed Harrington had pressured him specifically." "Did he say that Harrington pressured him?" "He said he had a loan on his print equipment," Bernard said carefully, "and that the decision about which stories to run had been complicated by the existence of that loan." Eleanor set down her pen. "Tell him to come see me," she said. "Whatever he thinks he did or didn't do, he still runs the county newspaper. When this federal inquiry becomes public record, I want the Gazette to report it accurately." She paused. "And I want someone to write down what was done to Gerald Pruitt. The man lost 40 acres he worked for 30 years and spent a decade blaming himself. That story should be in print." Bernard looked at her for a moment with the expression he had worn increasingly over the past weeks, the one that said he was still in the process of revising his original assessment of the woman Nathan Cole had been forced to marry. "I'll tell him," Bernard said. The federal summons came on a Tuesday 3 weeks after their second Cheyenne visit. It was served simultaneously on Edwin Harrington, his attorney Pierce, 2 named bank examiners, and 4 individuals identified in the documents, only as associated parties. 4 names that Nathan did not recognize, until Eleanor went pale when she read them, and told him quietly that they were territorial legislators. One of them was a man who sat on the land committee that approved frontier development loans. Harrington was given 15 days to respond. He responded in 12. His response came not through Pierce, but through a new attorney, a man from Denver named Calloway, who had the reputation Eleanor told Nathan of being the most expensive legal mind between Kansas City and San Francisco. Calloway's response was long technical and aimed primarily at Eleanor's credibility as a source of documentation. It cited the Forsyth case in Boston. It characterized Eleanor as a woman with a history of false accusations against financial institutions. It questioned the authenticity of the documents on the grounds that they had been compiled by an individual with no official legal standing. And it included near the end a line that Eleanor read twice before handing the document to Nathan without comment. Nathan read the line. It said that Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore Cole had been found during the Forsyth proceedings in Boston to have falsified a legal document, and that her credibility as a witness was therefore fundamentally compromised. Nathan looked up from the paper. "Is it true?" he asked. He asked it flat and direct, because that was the only way to ask it, and Eleanor, he had learned, needed things asked directly. "No," Eleanor said. "Then where did it come from?" "From Forsyth's people, the same place it came from in 1882, Eleanor said. Her voice was very controlled. "They fabricated it then to destroy my father's case, and they're using the same fabrication now. It was investigated at the time and found to be without foundation. But it was enough to shake the jury's confidence in the documents we'd presented, and the case collapsed." She paused. "And now Calloway is counting on it doing the same thing again." Nathan set the document down on the table. He sat down across from Eleanor and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and he could see what was happening behind her eyes. The old fear, the exhausted recognition of a pattern. She had thought she was done with the specific weight of knowing that the thing that had destroyed her father's work was being aimed at her now with the same precision. "We need proof it was fabricated," Nathan said. "I know. Do we have it?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "There was a clerk in my father's office," she said finally. "A young man named Peter Aldrich, my father's partner's son. He was there when Forsyth's people first produced that document. He knew it was false. He told my father so. And then Forsyth's attorneys got hold of him and—" She stopped. "He was 22 years old. They told him his father's firm would be next if he testified. He recanted." "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Eleanor said. "I lost track after Boston. He'd be, 25, 26 now." 26. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "This territory is full of young men from the East who moved west because something went wrong in their previous life," he said. "Moses has a cousin in Denver who does this kind of finding for a living, tracks people down when courts need them." Eleanor stared at him. "Let me write to him," Nathan said. "Tonight. It won't be fast, but—" "Nathan." Eleanor's voice had done something unusual. It had lost its professional control just briefly, just enough that what came through was unguarded and raw and real. "Why are you doing this? You could settle this case without the Forsyth document. You have enough documentation on Harrington's fraud without touching my past. You could let them say what they're saying about me, and the Willow Creek case would still stand." "Yes," Nathan said. "Then why?" "Because they're lying about you," Nathan said. "And I know they're lying about you, and I'm not going to stand next to you in front of a federal court and let them do it." He paused. "And because your father spent his life doing the right thing, and someone destroyed him for it, and I am not going to let them use his memory as a weapon against his daughter." Eleanor looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Lily was somewhere in the yard. They could hear her talking to one of the barn cats in the serious, instructive tone she used with animals and small children, and the ranch was moving through its evening sounds. And Eleanor Whitmore Cole sat across from the man she had married in the Willow Creek church in a faded blue dress and looked at him with something in her face that she had been managing very carefully for 12 weeks, and was no longer certain she could continue to manage. "Nathan," she said. "Eleanor, I don't know how to—" She stopped, tried again. "When I came to Willow Creek, I had decided I was done. Done fighting, done believing things could be made right, done expecting anyone to—" She stopped again. Her voice was not quite steady. "You were supposed to be a man I lived beside in practical arrangement. That was all I had the energy for. That was all I thought I was capable of." Nathan said nothing. He waited. "I was wrong about that," Eleanor said. "About what I was capable of, and about you." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the fullest kind of silence, the kind that contains more than words would. Nathan reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. Eleanor looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held his. And they sat like that in the kitchen his father built while the evening came down outside, and Lily's voice floated in through the window without speaking, because there was nothing that needed saying that wasn't already being said. Yay. Peter Aldrich was in Denver. Moses's cousin found him in 10 days, which was faster than Nathan had dared hope. He was working as a bookkeeper for a mining company 26 years old, as Eleanor had calculated, with the look of a young man who had been carrying something heavy for 4 years and had learned to walk straight under the weight of it, but had never quite gotten comfortable. Nathan went to Denver alone. Eleanor had wanted to come. Nathan had said no, and had said it in the tone that Eleanor had learned meant he had thought it through and was not going to move. "If you go," he had said, "Calloway's people will follow you, and Aldrich will know they're watching before we can talk to him. I'm a rancher from Wyoming. Nobody's watching me." Eleanor had accepted this with the particular expression she wore when she agreed with his reasoning, and was mildly irritated about agreeing with it. Nathan found Aldrich at his boarding house on a Wednesday evening after the workday, and he knocked on the door and waited. And when a young man with his father's careful eyes answered, Nathan said, "My name is Nathan Cole. My wife is Eleanor Whitmore. I've come from Willow Creek, Wyoming, and I think you know why I'm here." Peter Aldrich stared at him for a moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door. Nathan sat in Peter Aldrich's small room and told him what had been found in Wyoming, and what Calloway had filed in response, and what was at stake in the federal proceeding. He told it plainly and completely without editorial, because Aldrich deserved the whole truth and had already been given too many partial ones. When Nathan finished, Aldrich was quiet for a long time. "I was 22, he said finally. "I was 22, and they told me my father would lose everything." "I know," Nathan said. "I've thought about Eleanor Whitmore." He stopped. "About what I did, almost every day for 4 years. He looked at the floor. "Is she all right?" "She's stronger than anyone I've ever met," Nathan said. "But she needs the truth told, not for herself only, for your father too. Because what Forsyth did to Clarence Whitmore is the same pattern as what Harrington has done in Wyoming, and if we can show the federal court that the falsified document has a history of being used to silence witnesses, it becomes evidence of a pattern," Aldrich said, "not just a personal dispute." "Yes," Nathan said. Aldrich looked at him. "You love her," he said. It was not quite a question. Nathan held his gaze. He had not said it yet, had not said it to Eleanor, had not said it to himself with that particular word. But sitting in a boarding house room in Denver, he found that he could not deny it to a stranger without the denial feeling false. "Yes," he said. Aldrich nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window. He looked back at Nathan with the expression of a young man who has been waiting 4 years for a version of this moment and is now deciding whether to trust it. "I'll come," he said. "I'll give a sworn statement. I'll testify if it gets to that point." He paused. "I should have done it 4 years ago." "You were 22, Nathan said again. "You weren't wrong to be afraid." "I was wrong to stay afraid," Aldrich said. "There's a difference." Nathan rode back to Wyoming with Peter Aldrich's sworn statement folded in his coat, and the weight of it was not physical, but he felt it the whole way. The weight of a thing that had been owed for 4 years and was now finally going to be paid. Eleanor was at her desk when he came in. She looked up and she read his face the way she read documents for what was actually there, and what she found there made her push back from the desk and stand up. "He'll testify," she asked. "He'll testify," Nathan said. And his written statement describes in his own words exactly how Forsyth's attorneys produced that document and what they threatened him with to make him recant. He produced the folded papers from his coat and set them on her desk. He also included correspondence letters he kept between Forsyth's legal team that referenced the document as fabricated. He kept them because he felt guilty, and he didn't know what else to do with the guilt. Eleanor picked up the papers. She read them standing. Nathan watched her face move through recognition and relief, and something older and deeper that he couldn't quite name, the specific expression of a person who has been carrying a dead weight for a long time and has just felt it begin to lift. When she finished, she put the papers down carefully. She put her hand over them flat on the desk, the way a person touches something they need to confirm is real. "My father's name," she said. Her voice was almost steady. "They can't use his name to lie anymore." "No," Nathan said. "They can't." Eleanor looked at him. Her eyes were bright, and she did not look away, and she did not manage her expression. And for once, for the first time in the 12 weeks he had known her, Eleanor Whitmore Cole let him see all of it. The relief and the grief and the exhaustion and the particular fierce gratitude of a person who has finally been given back something that was taken from them a long time ago. Nathan crossed the room. He didn't think about it. There was no thought involved. It was the same order of movement, as breathing, as necessary, and as unpremeditated. He crossed to where she was standing behind her desk, and he put his arms around her, and Eleanor Whitmore Cole, who had been composed and capable and brave and guarded for every single day of the 12 weeks he had known her, put her face against his shoulder and held on. They stood like that for a long time. When she finally stepped back, she didn't apologize for it, and he didn't either. They looked at each other with the clear, level look of two people who have stopped pretending. "I should have said something before now," Nathan said. "So should I," Eleanor said. "I'm saying it now." He held her gaze. "I know this started as something neither of us chose. I know what it was. But I want you to know that what it is now, what you are to me now, has nothing to do with anyone's arrangement or anyone's plan. This is mine. This is my choice." He paused. "You are my choice." Eleanor looked at him for a long, clear moment. "I know," she said, and then quieter. "You're mine too." From outside, Lily's voice came through the window. "Papa, Moses says supper's going to be cold." Nathan closed his eyes for 1 second. Eleanor pressed her lips together and almost smiled. "We should go in," she said. "We should." Nathan agreed. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then Nathan took her hand, and they walked out of the office and into the kitchen where Lily was already at the table with her elbows on it, in defiance of every table manner Eleanor had attempted to instill. And Moses had apparently been recruited to serve, because he was standing at the stove with an expression of profound dignity that suggested he considered this beneath him, but was doing it anyway, and the kitchen was warm and smelled of cornbread, and the evening was coming down outside gold and steady over the Cole ranch. Lily looked at them when they came in. She looked at their hands briefly, and then she looked at her plate with the carefully arranged expression of a child who has noticed something and is choosing to say nothing about it, which was its own kind of wisdom. "Sit down," she said. "Moses has been waiting." "Moses has been waiting 4 minutes," Moses said without turning from the stove. "That's a long time," Lily said. "It is," Eleanor agreed and sat down beside her. Nathan sat at the head of the table that his father had built in the house his father had built on the land. His father had trusted him to keep. And he looked at the faces around that table. Eleanor with her hand now wrapped around a coffee cup, still slightly pink around the eyes, but composed and present and wholly herself. Lily, with her chin propped on her fist, watching Eleanor with the open, unguarded attention she had stopped hiding. Moses carrying bowls to the table with the gruff efficiency of a man who has decided that this family is worth feeding. And he thought about 12 weeks ago, when he had stood in the Willow Creek church with fury in his chest and watched a stranger in a faded blue dress walk toward him, and thought, "This is the worst thing that has happened to me." He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about most things as it turned out. But this kitchen, this evening, this table full of people who had found each other through someone else's cruelty and had made something real from it anyway, this Nathan Cole thought was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He picked up his fork. "Thank you," he said. To Moses technically, but also to all of them, also to the room, also to the strange hard road that had brought each of them to this exact moment. Moses grunted. Lily reached for the cornbread. Eleanor looked at Nathan across the table with a quiet smile that belonged only to him. Outside, the Wyoming evening settled over the ranch like a hand laid gently on a shoulder, and the Cole family ate their supper while the federal case against Edwin Harrington moved quietly and irreversibly toward the morning that would change everything. The federal hearing was set for the second Tuesday of October. Commissioner Harker sent word through official channels, which meant the notice arrived at the Willow Creek post office and was handed to Nathan by the postmaster himself, a man who 6 weeks ago had allowed his wife to make cutting remarks about Eleanor in public, and who now treated every piece of Cole correspondence with the careful respect of someone who has recognized which way the wind is actually blowing. Nathan took the envelope without comment and rode home and put it on Eleanor's desk without opening it, because it was her work that had made it exist, and she should be the one to read it first. Eleanor read it standing the way she read everything important. She read it once, then set it down, then picked it up and read it again. October 14th, she said. 3 weeks, Nathan said. 3 weeks. She set the notice down. Calloway will have prepared something. He'll have done everything he can to discredit the documentation in the time he's had. She paused. But he doesn't know about Peter Aldrich yet. He doesn't know Aldrich is willing to testify. How long before he finds out? Once we file Aldrich's statement with Harker's office, probably 48 hours. Eleanor looked at Nathan. We should file it tomorrow. Give Calloway as little preparation time as possible. Then we go tomorrow, Nathan said. Eleanor nodded. She was still looking at the notice, and Nathan watched her face do the thing it did when she was processing something larger than the immediate task, when she was looking at the shape of the whole thing rather than the next step. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were clear, and she looked, he thought, exactly like a person who has been preparing for something their whole life without knowing it, and has just understood that the preparation is finished and the thing itself is here. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She looked up. The question surprised her, he could see that. People did not often ask Eleanor Whitmore Cole if she was afraid. They assumed she wasn't, because she moved through difficult things without showing it, and the assumption was its own kind of loneliness. "Yes," she said. "Good," Nathan said. "Me too." She looked at him for a moment with that particular expression, the one that was still surprising him even now after weeks of learning her face. The one that meant he had said exactly the right thing without trying. "Let's go tell Lily," Eleanor said. "She'll want to know." Lily's response to the news was characteristic. She listened to the full explanation, Nathan and Eleanor sitting on either side of her at the kitchen table, explaining the hearing in terms she could understand without talking down to her, and when they finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Will Harrington go to jail? That depends on what the judge decides, Eleanor said. What do you think the judge will decide? Eleanor met her eyes. I think the evidence is strong enough that Harrington will have a very difficult time explaining his way out of it. Lily thought about this. What about the families who lost their land? The Pruitts. Will they get it back? Eleanor and Nathan looked at each other over Lily's head. Some of it may be recoverable, Eleanor said carefully. The land that Harrington still holds that he hasn't sold on to other parties the court can order returned. The rest is more complicated, but there will be financial restitution ordered, and the families who were defrauded will be compensated for what was taken. Lily sat with this for a moment. Mr. Pruitt told me once that he lost his South 40 because he was too old to manage it right, she said. He told me that when he came to fix our fence in August. He was embarrassed about it. I know, Eleanor said. You should tell him it wasn't his fault, Lily said, before the hearing. So he doesn't have to go into the courthouse still thinking he did something wrong. Nathan looked at his daughter. When did you become this wise? He asked. Lily considered the question with complete seriousness. I think I was always like this, she said. You just weren't paying attention. Eleanor pressed her lips together. Nathan saw her doing it. He felt something in his own chest that was too large and too warm for the kitchen to contain, and he recognized it for what it was with the particular recognition of a man who has found something he did not know was lost. He reached over and put his hand on top of Lily's. She didn't pull away. We'll go see Mr. Pruitt tomorrow, he said, before Cheyenne. They went to Gerald Pruitt's place early in the morning, just Nathan and Eleanor together, and Nathan waited by the horses while Eleanor went inside. He couldn't hear what was said. He saw through the window Pruitt's face when Eleanor told him the movement of it, the complicated private reckoning that a 70-year-old man does when he is given back something he had stopped believing existed. He saw Pruitt put his face in his hands for a moment. He saw Eleanor sit beside him and wait the way she had learned to wait, without filling the silence, without managing the emotion, just present. When she came back out, Nathan didn't ask what had been said. He could see it on her face, and he could see it was enough. He asked if he could come to the hearing, Eleanor said. What did you tell him? I told him to bring anyone who wanted to come, Eleanor said. The courthouse is a public building. They filed Peter Aldrich's statement with Harker's office on Wednesday morning. By Friday, Callaway had filed a response challenging its admissibility. By the following Monday, Harker had denied the challenge and entered the statement into the federal record, which meant it was real and official and permanent, and Callaway knew it. Nathan heard about Callaway's response from Eleanor on a Monday evening, and he heard about Harker's denial on Tuesday, and on Wednesday morning, Moses knocked on the office door and said there were people at the gate. Not threatening people, just people. Carl Briggs and his son James, the Delacroix couple. Agnes Morrison with her husband's documents held under one arm. Gerald Pruitt with a younger man. Nathan didn't recognize Pruitt's son. He realized the one who had moved to Colorado, who had apparently been written to, and who had apparently come back. They had not been summoned. They had simply come. Nathan went to the gate and looked at them. What is this? He asked. Carl Briggs said, We're coming to Cheyenne. The hearing is next Tuesday. We know when the hearing is, Carl said. We want to come, all of us. He looked around at the assembled group with the expression of a man who has said this for all of them. We're the ones whose names are on those documents. We should be there when it's read into the federal record. Nathan looked at them, all 8 people, who had driven or ridden to his gate on a Wednesday morning to say that they were not going to be absent from the moment that changed their lives. He thought about what Eleanor had said months ago in the beginning, when this was only 2 people at a kitchen table and a stack of altered documents. He counted on the fact that each of you only saw your own piece. None of you saw it together. Well, they were seeing it together now. Come in, Nathan said. Eleanor's going to want to talk to all of you. The night before the hearing, Nathan found Eleanor in the office at midnight. She was not reviewing documents. The documents were stacked and ordered and ready, had been ready for 2 days. She was simply sitting at her desk with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on the middle distance, in the way of a person who has done everything that can be done and is now in the particular purgatory of waiting. Nathan brought 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her and sat across from her, and they drank in quiet for a while. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. "I'm thinking about my father," Eleanor said. "I'm thinking about the morning he realized the Forsyth case was going to collapse. I walked into his office and he was sitting exactly like this, hands on the desk, looking at nothing. I asked him what was wrong, and he said," she paused, "I did everything right, and it still didn't hold." "This is different," Nathan said. "I know it's different. I know the evidence is stronger, and Peter Aldrich is with us this time, and Harker is not a man who can be pressured the way the Boston judge was pressured." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "But I also know that rooms full of powerful men have their own gravity. And Eleanor Whitmore Cole is still a woman with no legal standing presenting evidence about a man who has controlled this territory for 15 years, and who has people in that courtroom who have benefited from what he's built." "You have the evidence," Nathan said. "My father had evidence too." "You have something your father didn't have," Nathan said. She looked up. "You have all of us," Nathan said. "Carl, Agnes, the Pruitts, Bernard and Martha, James Briggs, 8 families in that courtroom who signed their names and are there because they chose to be there." He held her gaze. "And you have me. I'm not going to let them do what they did to your father. Whatever Calloway tries, whatever angle he comes from, I'm going to be next to you, and I am not going to move." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "That's the only reason I'm not more afraid than I am." She reached across the desk and he took her hand, and they sat in the midnight office with the whole weight of tomorrow between them, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed saying. Gigi. The federal courthouse in Cheyenne held more people on October 14th than the clerk had ever seen for a civil land fraud proceeding. Word had moved the way Eleanor had said word moves through the families, through the Gazette, through the particular networks of people who have a stake in something and know it. The 8 Willow Creek families were there, all of them arranged in the gallery, with the focused quiet of people who understand they are present at something that concerns them personally. Gerald Pruitt's son sat beside his father with his hat in his hands. Agnes Morrison had worn her best dress. Carl Briggs had shaved. Arthur Pratt from the Gazette was in the back with a notebook. He had told Nathan the week before because he had been afraid for 3 years, and he was finished with it. He had also, in the previous week's edition of the Gazette, run a front-page story correcting the earlier piece about Eleanor, and stating plainly what the paper had been pressured to publish and why. It was the bravest thing Pratt had done in his career as a journalist, and he knew it, and the knowing had changed something in his face. Harrington sat at the respondents' table with Calloway on one side, and Pierce on one side, and the specific expression of a man who has decided that composure is the only weapon he has left. He was still large and silver-haired and physically commanding. He still looked like authority, but he had stopped looking like certainty. Nathan noticed that the moment he walked in. Eleanor sat at the other table with Commissioner Harker's designated federal examiner, a man named Briggs, no relation to Carl, who had spent 6 weeks verifying every calculation in Eleanor's documentation and had found them accurate to the last figure. Nathan sat beside Eleanor. He had asked to be there, and the examiner had allowed it because Nathan Cole was a named plaintiff and had standing. Judge Wallace Price was 63 years old, silver-bearded, with the settled authority of a man who had seen every variety of human behavior and had opinions about it. He came into the courtroom and sat and looked at both tables with the same level-assessing gaze, and then he looked at the gallery, which was fuller than it should have been, and then he looked back at the front. "We are here today," Price said, "in the matter of the United States Federal Land Commission versus Edwin Harrington and associated parties regarding systematic fraud in land loan instruments affecting a minimum of 12 properties across 3 Wyoming counties and associated activity in the state of Colorado." He paused. This court has reviewed the documentary evidence submitted by the Commission and has determined that it presents sufficient basis for federal prosecution. The purpose of today's proceeding is to establish the formal record here testimony and determine the appropriate remedies. He looked at both tables. We will begin. Chapter 1. Calloway was good. Nathan had known he would be good, and Calloway was better than good. He was precise and methodical, and he attacked the documentation not with denial, but with complexity, arguing that the discrepancies Eleanor had identified were the result of standard accounting adjustments permitted under territorial banking law, and that the accumulated pattern she had presented reflected her interpretation rather than demonstrated intent. It was a strong argument. Nathan felt it land in the room, felt the way some people in the gallery shifted slightly, felt the examiner make a note. Then Eleanor's examiner stood up. He had been verifying these documents for 6 weeks. He was a federal officer with no personal stake in the outcome and no prior knowledge of Willow Creek County. He went through the calculations the way Eleanor had taught Nathan to go through them methodically, specifically without editorializing. He showed that the alterations were not consistent with standard accounting adjustments because they did not appear in the bank's own internal records as adjustments. He showed that the pattern repeated with near identical structure across 12 separate accounts in 12 separate families across 3 counties over 7 years. He showed that the mathematical probability of such a consistent pattern occurring through honest error was, as he put it, so remote as to be functionally impossible. Calloway objected 4 times during this testimony. Price overruled all 4. Then Peter Aldrich took the stand. He was 26 years old, and he was clearly nervous. Nathan could see it in his hands, which he kept very still to prevent them from shaking. But his voice was steady, and his account was precise and exact, and he did not deviate from it under Calloway's cross-examination, even when Calloway pressed him hard on his earlier recantation. Even when Calloway implied that a young man who had changed his story once might change it again. "Why should this court believe you now?" Calloway said, "when you told a different story in 1882. Aldrich looked at him. "Because in 1882 I was 22 years old, and I was threatened, and I was afraid, and I made a choice. I have regretted every single day since. And because Eleanor Whitmore's father lost his career and his health, and eventually his life in part, because I was not brave enough to say what I knew to be true." He paused. "I am not 22 anymore, and I am done being afraid." The gallery was completely silent. Price looked at Calloway. Calloway had no follow-up question. "Chumperball." Harrington took the stand. It was his choice. Calloway had clearly argued against it, because Nathan could see from Calloway's expression when Harrington stood that this was not the attorney's preferred move. But Harrington was not a man who could sit and be spoken about without speaking. 15 years of being the largest presence in every room had made him constitutionally incapable of silence when the room was discussing him. He was composed. He was reasonable. He presented himself as a businessman who had taken risks to develop a frontier territory, who had lent money to ranching families when no other institution would, who had accepted land as collateral because frontier land was the only collateral available, and who was now being accused by a woman with a documented history of grievance against financial institutions. "Mrs. Cole," Harrington said in response to Price's question about the Willow Creek families, "came to this county with a history that the court should be aware of. She attempted a similar action in Boston." "The Boston matter has been addressed in the documentary record," Price said. "The document used to discredit her father's case in 1882 has been established as a fabrication. I am not going to allow it to be used again in this courtroom. Move on." Harrington's composure cracked. Just slightly, just for a moment. But Nathan saw it, and Calloway saw it, and every person in the gallery who was paying attention saw it. "Are you aware," Price continued, his voice entirely level, "that this court has also received through Commissioner Harker's office documentation suggesting that your banking operation has made payments to 2 members of the territorial legislature in exchange for regulatory accommodation?" The gallery stirred. Calloway was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor, that matter is not before this court." "It is now," Price said. "Sit down, Mr. Calloway." Calloway sat. Harrington looked at Price. He looked at the gallery. He looked at the table where Eleanor sat, and Nathan watched his expression move through something the specific private movement of a man who has built a structure over many years and is watching it come apart at the points he thought were strongest. "I would like to consult with my attorney," Harrington said. "You'll have that opportunity," Price said. "Answer the question first." Harrington did not answer the question. The refusal went into the record. The hearing lasted 4.5 hours. At the end of it, Price took 40 minutes to review the complete record and delivered his findings from the bench in the precise structured language of a man who has been a federal judge for 20 years and understands that the words he speaks in this room today will be copied and filed and read for a long time. The findings were these: that the documentary evidence established systematic and deliberate fraud in loan instruments across 12 Willow Creek County properties, that the fraud had been ongoing for a minimum of 7 years, with evidence suggesting the pattern extended into 2 additional Wyoming counties and Colorado, that the Forsyth document used to discredit Eleanor Whitmore Cole in 1882 was established as a fabrication and would be so noted in the federal record, that Edwin Harrington and his attorney, Thomas Pierce, were remanded to federal custody pending further proceedings on the fraud charges and the related matter of alleged legislative corruption, that all properties currently held by Harrington Land and Banking that had been acquired through foreclosure under the fraudulent loan structure were to be frozen pending disposition, and that restitution proceedings would begin within 30 days. The gallery made a sound when the custody order was read. Not a cheer, exactly, more the particular sound of people who have been holding their breath for a long time and have just been told they can stop. Nathan watched 2 federal marshals approach Harrington's table. He watched Calloway speak urgently into Harrington's ear. He watched Harrington stand slowly with the careful dignity of a man who is going to maintain his physical bearing, if nothing else, and submit to the process without resistance. And then Nathan turned to Eleanor. She was looking at the bench, not at Harrington. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her the way they had been the night before in the midnight office. Her face was very still. "Eleanor," he said quietly. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were bright. She did not cry. She would not have cried in this room in front of these people, and Nathan understood that about her completely. But her eyes were bright, and her face was open in a way that it almost never was in public, and what he saw there was not triumph exactly. It was older than triumph and quieter. It was the specific expression of a person who has set something down that they have been carrying for a very long time. "Your father's name is in that record now," Nathan said. "The right way." Eleanor pressed her lips together, nodded once. "We should go tell the others," she said. They turned together to face the gallery. Carl Briggs was already standing. Agnes Morrison had her hand over her mouth. Gerald Pruitt's son had his arm around his father's shoulders, and Gerald Pruitt, 70 years old, the man who had spent a decade believing he had failed, was sitting very straight with his eyes closed and his jaw working with the effort of containing something too large for a public room. Martha Delacroix was crying openly, which was her prerogative, and Bernard had his hand on her back and was looking at Eleanor with an expression that contained 4 months of revised opinion. James Briggs said something to his father that Nathan couldn't hear. Carl laughed, a real one, surprised and full, the first time Nathan had heard Carl laugh since before this began. Eleanor walked into the gallery. She went to Agnes Morrison first, because Agnes had come alone and had the most to carry. She sat beside her and took her hand and said something quiet, and Agnes nodded and covered Eleanor's hand with both of hers. Then she went to Gerald Pruitt. Pruitt opened his eyes when she stopped in front of him. He was a lean, weathered man who had worked his land for 40 years and lost part of it to a lie, and had believed the lie was his own fault. "Mr. Pruitt," Eleanor said. "Mrs. Cole," he said. "It wasn't your fault," Eleanor said. "It was never your fault, and the record says so now." Pruitt looked at her. His jaw worked once more. His son's arm tightened around his shoulders. "Thank you," Pruitt said, "for looking." "You came to us," Eleanor said. "You brought your papers and you trusted us. Thank you for that." Pruitt's son extended his hand to Eleanor. "My name is Robert," he said. "I've been in Colorado 4 years. I'm coming home." Eleanor shook his hand. "Good," she said. "Your father will be glad to have you, Marate." They rode back to Willow Creek in a loose group, all 8 families, the Coles in the lead wagon. The others spread out behind on horseback and in their own wagons, moving through the October afternoon in the particular companionable quiet of people who have been through something together and don't need to talk about it yet. Lily was waiting at the ranch gate. She had stayed behind with Moses, which had been negotiated with some difficulty, because Lily had strong opinions about being left out of things, but she had ultimately accepted it on the condition that someone send word as soon as the hearing ended. Moses had received the telegram Nathan sent from Cheyenne and had apparently delivered the news to Lily 3 hours ago, because when the wagon pulled up, she was already at the gate with her arms crossed and her expression arranged into what was trying to be casual and was completely failing at it. Nathan pulled the wagon up and climbed down. Lily uncrossed her arms. Was he arrested? He was remanded to federal custody, Nathan said, which is more serious than arrested. Lily processed this. And the families, the Pruitts. The land that can be returned will be returned, Nathan said, and the rest will be compensated. Lily nodded slowly, taking inventory of this information with her characteristic thoroughness. Then she looked past Nathan at Eleanor, who was climbing down from the other side of the wagon. Lily walked around the wagon. Eleanor turned and found Lily standing directly in front of her. Lily's expression had done the thing it did very rarely. It had dropped its careful armor entirely, and what was underneath was simply a 7-year-old girl who had been home alone for 12 hours, with something large to feel and no one to feel it with. "You did it," Lily said. "We did it," Eleanor said. "All of us." "But you—" Lily stopped. Tried again. "You started it. You found it in the books. You were the one who knew what to look for." "Because someone taught me to look," Eleanor said. "My father. He spent his whole life teaching me, and he never got to see what it was for." She looked at Lily steadily. "Now I know what it was for." Lily took one step forward and put her arms around Eleanor's waist and held on. Eleanor's hands came up around the child's shoulders, and she held Lily the way she had held her through the fever night, with the complete unhurried attention of a person who is fully present and has nowhere else to be. Nathan stood and watched. He did not trust his face. He looked at the sky briefly, vast and blue, in that particular Wyoming October way, enormous and clear. And when he looked back, Eleanor had her cheek resting on the top of Lily's head, and her eyes closed. And Moses was standing by the barn, with his arms crossed, and looking determinedly at the middle distance, with the expression of a man who is definitely not affected by anything he's witnessing. Decker had apparently found something very interesting to examine on the fence post. After a moment, Lily said muffled against Eleanor's shoulder, "Can I call you Mama?" The question settled over the yard like the first snow of winter, quiet and inevitable, and changing the shape of everything it touched. Eleanor opened her eyes. She pulled back just enough to look at Lily's face. "Only if you want to," Eleanor said. "Only if it's true." "It's true," Lily said. "You've been it for a while. I just didn't say it." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "Then yes," she said. "You can." Nathan put his hand over his eyes, just for a moment. Moses walked into the barn. The door closed very gently behind him. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek changed in the visible and invisible ways that places change when the structure that has been holding them in a particular shape is removed. Gerald Pruitt's South 40 acres were returned to him by court order in November. He wrote a letter to his son in Colorado that his son read on the same day he had already packed his belongings and was loading a wagon to come home. Robert Pruitt arrived back in Willow Creek on a Friday afternoon, and the two of them stood in the South 40 for a long time without talking about anything in particular. Arthur Pratt at the Gazette ran the full account of the federal proceedings across 4 editions, including a detailed piece on what Eleanor's documentation had revealed and how it had been assembled. He also ran a piece about Clarence Whitmore of Boston, about his career and his character, and about the falsified document that had been used to destroy his case and that had now been formally expunged from the federal record. He ran the piece on the front page. He told Nathan it was the most important thing he had published in 20 years. The territorial legislature was investigated separately from the Harrington fraud case, and 2 of the 4 named members resigned from their positions before the new year. The investigation continued without them. New land oversight regulations were proposed and passed within 8 months, modeled in part on a framework that had been submitted anonymously to Commissioner Harker's office, and that bore in its structure and language an unmistakable resemblance to the way Eleanor Whitmore Cole thought about legal problems. She never claimed authorship. She didn't need to. The women of Willow Creek came to her in 1s and 2s starting in November. They came for different reasons, some because they had heard what she had done and wanted to understand how she had done it. Some because they had daughters and were beginning to think differently about what those daughters might be capable of. Some simply because they had spent years finding her interesting and were tired of being afraid of Harrington. And now neither condition applied. Eleanor started a reading group first, then a mathematics class 1 morning a week in the back room of the general store, then a legal literacy session because 3 women came to her with documents they didn't understand, and she realized the problem was systemic. By spring, 14 women in Willow Creek County were studying land contract law with Eleanor Whitmore Cole. 2 of them later went east to formal legal education. 1 of them came back. On a Sunday evening in March of 1885, Nathan and Eleanor sat on the porch of the house his father built and watched the light go down over the Cole ranch. They had been married 8 months. The legal proceedings were moving through their slow federal progress, and the Harrington case was not over. It would not be fully resolved for another 2 years, and there would be frustrating months and setbacks and days when the machinery of justice moved so slowly it seemed to have stopped. But the essential thing had been done. The fraud was on record. The families were in the process of being made as whole as they could be made. The structure that had held Willow Creek down for 15 years had been dismantled, not completely, not easily, but permanently. Lily was inside reading. They could see the lamp through the window. Nathan said, "I want to ask you something." Eleanor turned to look at him. "I want to ask you to stay," he said. "I know you're here. I know we're married. But this started as something neither of us chose, and I want to be clear with you that I am choosing it now, completely. Whatever you want to do, wherever the legal work takes you, whatever comes next, I want you here. At this ranch, in this house. I want you to be my wife because we chose each other, not because Harrington forced our hands." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. The evening was coming down around them, gold and purple, and the cattle were moving in the lower field, and somewhere inside, Lily turned a page. "Nathan," Eleanor said, "I was going to come back, even if you hadn't asked." "I know," he said. "I wanted to ask anyway." She leaned into him, and he put his arm around her, and they sat on the porch of the house his father built in the easy, solid way of 2 people who have earned their peace. "8 months ago," Eleanor said, "you were standing at the altar in Willow Creek Church, looking like you were about to face a firing squad." "That's accurate," Nathan said. "I walked down that aisle and I looked at you, and I thought this man is furious and exhausted, and he has been forced into something he didn't choose, and he is going to make this very difficult." "Also accurate." "And then," Eleanor said, "you stood up in that church and told Harrington on the record that the marriage was coerced, and you said it loud enough for everyone to hear, and I thought—" She paused. "What did you think?" "I thought this man does not back down from things that are true," Eleanor said. "Even when the truth is inconvenient for him, even when no one is making him say it." She paused. "I thought that was the most important thing I had seen in a very long time." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "What did you think of me after that?" "I thought I was in serious trouble," Eleanor said. Nathan laughed. It was the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and unguarded, and Eleanor smiled at the sound of it, the way she smiled at things that were genuinely unexpected. "You were never in trouble," he said. "I was absolutely in trouble," she said. "I had come to this county to disappear and I was very good at it. And then you had to go and be you." "Me," Nathan said. "Principled and stubborn and kind in ways you didn't know you were being," Eleanor said. "It was very inconsiderate." He pulled her a little closer. She let him. They sat as the last of the light left the sky and the stars began to appear in the Wyoming darkness one at a time, and then all at once, the way they always did out here, enormous and clear and indifferent to the small human dramas below them, except that the small human dramas below them were, after all, the only thing that mattered. Inside, Lily closed her book and called out, "Is supper happening, or are you two just going to sit outside forever?" "Give us 5 minutes," Nathan called back. "You said that 20 minutes ago," Lily said. "She gets that from you," Eleanor told Nathan. "She absolutely does not," Nathan said. They stayed on the porch another 10 minutes. People in Willow Creek told the story of Eleanor Cole for a long time after that. They told it the way communities tell the stories that matter to them imprecisely, with embellishment, with details that shifted and grew in the retelling, until the woman in the story was larger than any one person could actually be. Which is what happens to people who do things that change the shape of a place. They told the story of the woman who came west with nothing and saw what no one else had thought to look for. The woman who built a case from other people's documents and took it to a federal court and won. The woman who returned a 70-year-old man's land to him and wrote new laws into the territorial record and started a school in the back of a dry goods store where the daughters of ranching families learned to read contracts and understand their own rights. They told it as a story about courage, which it was. They told it as a story about justice, which it also was. The ones who knew Eleanor well enough told it as a story about a woman who had been broken in Boston and had come west to hide and had found against every reasonable expectation that she was not actually the kind of person who could stay hidden, not because she was incapable of it, but because when she saw something wrong, she was constitutionally incapable of walking past it. And sometimes, the people who told the story would add, "But the man she married, the rancher, who was forced into it, who was furious about it, who stood in the church and said out loud that it was coerced, that man was the one who went to Denver to find a witness who could give Eleanor back her father's name. That man stood next to her in a federal courtroom and didn't move." The story of Eleanor Cole was also the story of Nathan Cole, and Lily Cole, who grew up in a house where a woman's intelligence was treated as a matter of course, rather than a source of suspicion, became the kind of woman her county had not quite seen before, fierce and practical and unafraid of rooms full of powerful men, because she had watched her mother walk into those rooms and change them. The marriage that began as a punishment became a partnership. The partnership became the great love of both their lives. And the woman that Willow Creek had called an old maid, the woman no one wanted, the woman society had discarded, became the woman who proved in a federal courthouse in Cheyenne in the fall of 1884 that the most dangerous thing in any unjust system is not the person with the most power. It is the person with the clearest eyes, the steadiest hands, and nothing left to lose, who turns out in the end to have everything worth fighting for.